Tonight, we're going somewhere that very few people have ever seen in quite this way. Not the boardroom where fortunes were made and lost. Not the marble banking hall where crowds once pressed against teller windows. Tonight, you're walking up the steps of a private mansion built by banking itself, and the heavy door is opening just for you. Fifth Avenue, midnight. The year is 1907, and this is the golden age of American finance, when money could buy marble palaces and the men who moved millions lived like princes in houses that rivaled European royalty. The gaslight flickers softly against limestone walls, and somewhere above, electric bulbs glow with that new, steady radiance that speaks of progress and power. So let your shoulders drop. Let the evening settle around you like a perfectly tailored coat. And when you're ready, we'll walk together through doors that rarely open to strangers, into rooms where the very air seems to hold the weight of wealth. This is what it feels like to rest inside a banker's mansion, where even empires must eventually close their eyes. The night air is cool against your face as you stand on Fifth Avenue, looking up at the mansion that rises before you. It is late, perhaps 11:30, and the street is quieter than you might expect. A few carriages pass in the distance, their wheels clattering softly on cobblestones, and somewhere far off you can hear the elevated railway carrying the last travellers of the evening home. But here, in this particular stretch of avenue, there is an extraordinary stillness, as if wealth itself creates a buffer against the noise and chaos of the city beyond. The mansion occupies an entire lot between 51st and 52nd Streets, its limestone facade glowing pale in the gaslight from the street lamps. The stone was quarried in Indiana, you've heard, each block cut to precise specifications and transported by rail to New York, then hauled by wagon to this site. The cost of the limestone alone would have been staggering, perhaps $50,000 or more, and that's before you account for the skilled stonemasons who spent months carving the decorative elements that frame each window and doorway. The building rises 4 stories above the street, with a 5th floor tucked into the mansard roof, that distinctive French style with its steep lower slope and shallow upper section lined with dormer windows. The roof itself is covered in slate shipped from Vermont, each piece individually fitted, capable of lasting a century or more if properly maintained. The architect who designed this house studied at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, as so many American architects did in those days, and he brought back with him the grandeur and discipline of French classical design. Above the entrance, carved into the limestone pediment, is a coat of arms. Not a real one, of course, not in the European sense. The banker who built this house came from modest origins, his grandfather perhaps a merchant or a farmer, his father a local bank manager in some smaller city. But wealth in America creates its own heraldry, its own symbols of legitimacy, and so the stonemasons carved what the architect drew. A shield with eagles and laurel branches, symbols of success rather than inheritance. You begin walking slowly toward the entrance, taking in the details as you approach. The front steps are marble, imported from Italy at considerable expense, their surface still smooth despite years of use. To either side of the stairs, iron railings rise in elegant curves, their surfaces painted black and regularly maintained by the staff. The metalwork was forged by craftsmen in Brooklyn, specialists who understood how to heat and bend iron into shapes that were both functional and beautiful. The neighborhood around you represents the greatest concentration of wealth in America, perhaps in the world at this particular moment in history. To the north, just a few blocks away, stands the Vanderbilt Mansion, built by the grandson of Commodore Vanderbilt, who made his fortune in railroads and shipping. That house cost more than $3 million to construct in the 1870s, a sum so vast that newspapers published detailed accounts of its extravagance, wondering aloud whether such spending could be justified. To the south, you might find the mansion of another banking family, or perhaps an industrialist who made his fortune in steel or oil. The Astors are nearby, their wealth derived from real estate accumulated over generations. The Carnegies, the Fricks, the Morgans, all of them chose to build their palaces along this stretch of Fifth Avenue, transforming what had been a residential neighborhood into something approaching a royal quarter, an American version of the grand boulevards of Paris or the elegant squares of London. The economics of this transformation are fascinating if you pause to consider them. In 1870, you might have purchased a lot on Fifth Avenue in this neighborhood for perhaps $20,000. By 1900, that same lot would fetch 10 times as much, and the appreciation continues year by year. The land beneath this mansion alone is worth perhaps $300,000, and that's before accounting for the building that sits upon it. The decision to build here, to construct a house of this scale and grandeur, was not made lightly. The banker who commissioned this mansion spent nearly 2 years planning it, consulting with architects and touring the great houses of Europe to gather ideas. He visited palaces in France and villas in Italy, making careful notes about ceiling heights and window placements, about the flow of rooms and the relationship between public and private spaces. He understood that he was not simply building a house, but creating a statement, a physical manifestation of his success and a legacy for his children. The cost of construction ran to approximately $2 million over 4 years of work, from 1902 to 1906. To put this figure in perspective, the average American worker in those years earned perhaps $500 annually. The mansion represents the lifetime earnings of 4,000 workers, an almost incomprehensible concentration of labour and resources in a single building. And yet for the banker, who managed portfolios worth tens of millions, who arranged loans that built railways across continents, the expense was justified. This was not mere vanity but strategy, a way of signalling to clients and competitors alike that he possessed the wealth and stability to be trusted with their fortunes. You reach the front door now, standing at the top of the marble steps, and pause to look back at the avenue. The view is extraordinary, a perspective that few people ever see. The street stretches north and south, lined with similar mansions, their facades catching the light from gas lamps and the occasional electric bulb. In the daytime, this avenue bustles with activity. Delivery wagons bringing supplies to the households, private carriages taking residents to appointments and social calls, pedestrians strolling past to admire the architecture. But now, at this late hour, the avenue belongs to silence and shadow, to the night itself. The houses you see around you represent an era of American history that will prove to be brief. These private palaces, built with such confidence and extravagance, will begin to disappear within a generation. Some will be demolished to make way for apartment buildings and commercial properties as Fifth Avenue transforms from residential to retail. Others will be converted into museums or institutions, their private splendour made public, their rooms walked through by thousands of visitors who once could never have crossed their thresholds. The economics of maintaining such houses will become impossible as income taxes and estate taxes rise, as the cost of domestic servants increases, as the social structures that supported this way of life gradually erode. But tonight, in 1907, none of that future is visible. Tonight these houses stand at the peak of their glory, their windows glowing with light, their walls containing lives of extraordinary privilege and extraordinary responsibility. The men who built these palaces did not simply accumulate wealth. They managed it, deployed it, used it to finance the explosive growth of American industry and infrastructure. They were not always good men, not always fair men, but they were undeniably powerful, and their decisions shaped the economic landscape of an entire nation. You turn back toward the door, noticing details you might have missed before. The doorway itself is framed by carved stone, classical columns rising on either side to support a heavy lintel. The door is made of oak, thick and solid, its surface decorated with bronze fittings that gleam even in the dim light. The knocker is particularly fine, a lion's head holding a ring in its mouth, the metalwork so detailed you can see individual strands in the lion's mane. But you don't need to knock tonight. The door swings open silently on hinges maintained with oil and care, and warm light spills out from the entrance hall within. A footman stands just inside, his livery immaculate, and he steps aside with a small bow to allow you entry. He doesn't speak, perhaps sensing that you're not quite ready for conversation, and you appreciate his discretion. Tonight is not about ceremony or formality. Tonight is about seeing this place as it truly is, about understanding the world that banking built. You step across the threshold, feeling the change immediately. The outside air, cool and slightly damp with autumn moisture, is replaced by the warmth of the entrance hall. The sounds of the city fade to nothing, absorbed by thick walls and heavy doors, and suddenly you exist in a different realm entirely. The gaslight fixtures on the walls cast a golden glow that seems somehow richer and more precious than the ordinary light, and the marble floor beneath your feet gleams like still water. The door closes behind you with a sound that is both soft and final, a whisper of oak against oak, of bronze latch sliding into place. The street and everything it represents is shut away now, held at a distance by walls that cost fortunes to build and fortunes to maintain. You have entered the private world of American banking aristocracy, a world that exists behind these limestone walls and marble floors, and the night that stretches ahead promises to reveal its secrets slowly, gently, with the kind of unhurried patience that only great wealth can afford. The footman has disappeared, retreating to whatever duties occupy household staff at this late hour, and you find yourself alone in the entrance hall. Ahead of you, a staircase rises toward the upper floors, its steps covered in carpet and its balustrade carved from walnut that glows warmly in the lamplight. But there's no hurry to climb. The house will reveal itself in its own time, and you have all the hours of this long night to explore. For now, you simply stand and breathe, and let the extraordinary beauty of this space settle over you like a blessing. The entrance hall stretches before you, and your first impression is of light caught in stone, of surfaces that seem to glow from within. The floor beneath your feet is a masterwork of marble laid in geometric patterns, each piece cut to fit precisely against its neighbours. The stone comes from 3 different quarries, you've learned, creating a natural variation in colour that makes the pattern seem alive. Cream marble from Carrara in Italy forms the background, while darker accents come from Belgium and France, their grey and rose tones creating borders and medallions that draw the eye forward, deeper into the house. The cost of this floor alone would have supported a working family for years. Each marble slab had to be quarried, cut to exact specifications, crated for shipping, and transported by sea from Europe to New York. The voyage took weeks, with the precious cargo carefully protected from salt spray and shifting that might crack the stone. Upon arrival at the New York docks, the marble was loaded onto wagons and hauled through the city streets to this address, where Italian craftsmen waited to begin the delicate work of installation. These craftsmen were specialists, men who had learned their trade in the workshops of Rome and Florence, working on churches and palaces that had stood for centuries. They were recruited specifically for projects like this one, offered passage to America, and wages that exceeded what they could earn at home. A master marble setter might command $4 or $5 per day, an extraordinary sum when you consider that an unskilled labourer earned perhaps 50 cents for the same hours of work. The economics of this disparity reveal something important about the nature of craftsmanship. True skill cannot be rushed or replaced, and those who possess it can name their price. The installation of this floor took nearly 4 months, with teams of workers on their knees for 10 or 12 hours each day, fitting each piece, checking levels, ensuring that the surface would be perfectly flat and the pattern perfectly aligned. They mixed their own mortar according to formulas passed down through generations, adding just the right proportions of lime and sand to create a bed that would hold the marble securely for a century or more. When the installation was complete and the surface had been polished to its final gleaming finish, the craftsman moved on to the next project, the next mansion, the next expression of American wealth shaped by European hands. You begin walking slowly across this floor, feeling its smoothness even through your shoes. The surface has been polished so thoroughly that it reflects the light from the fixtures above, doubling the illumination and creating an effect of walking on water, on something fluid and precious rather than solid stone. Your footsteps echo softly in the vast space, each sound absorbed quickly by the high ceiling and the thick walls, creating an acoustic environment that feels both intimate and grand. The walls of the entrance hall rise for 2 full stories, creating a volume of space that takes the breath away. They are faced with more marble, panels of cream and gold fitted together with such precision that the seams are nearly invisible. Above a certain height, perhaps 12 feet from the floor, the marble gives way to plaster that has been painted in soft tones of ivory and touched here and there with gilt. The effect is of richness without heaviness, of luxury that somehow remains light and airy despite the density of materials. Columns punctuate the space at regular intervals, their capitals carved in the Corinthian style with acanthus, leaves that seem almost to move in the flickering gaslight. These columns are structural, bearing actual weight from the floors above, but they have been clad in marble and decorated to transform function into art. The carving of each capital required days of patient work by a sculptor trained in classical forms, someone who understood the subtle curves and depths that make stone leaves seem soft and organic rather than hard and static. Between the columns, alcoves hold classical sculptures, plaster copies of famous works from antiquity. There is a Venus, modest and eternal, her drapery frozen in marble that will never age. There is an Apollo, his archer's pose captured in the moment before release. These are not original works, not priceless artifacts from ancient Rome, but careful reproductions made by Italian workshops that specialized in such copies. Even so, each sculpture cost several $1,000s, and their placement here speaks to the banker's desire to associate himself with classical learning, with the civilization of Greece and Rome, with cultural sophistication that transcends mere money. At the far end of the hall, the grand staircase rises in two symmetrical flights that curve upward to meet at a landing before continuing to the second floor. The staircase is perhaps the most dramatic feature of the entire house, visible from the front door and designed to make an impression on every visitor who enters. The steps themselves are marble, continuing the cream and grey pattern of the floor, while the balustrades are carved from walnut brought from forests in the Midwest, and seasoned for years before being shaped by master woodworkers. The banister feels smooth and cool beneath your hand as you begin to climb, its surface polished by the oil of countless palms over the years. The wood has a deep, rich colour that comes from age and care, from regular applications of beeswax rubbed in by housemaids, whose job includes maintaining every wooden surface in this enormous house. The economics of such maintenance are easy to overlook but impossible to avoid. A mansion of this scale requires constant attention, a small army of servants working in carefully choreographed shifts to keep everything clean, polished, functional, and beautiful. The household staff for a home like this might number 20 or more, a butler to oversee the male servants and manage the wine cellar, earning perhaps $60 per month, a housekeeper to supervise the female staff and order household supplies, earning similar wages. Below them, a hierarchy of specialized workers, a cook and her assistants, ladies' maids and valets for the master and mistress of the house, footmen to serve at table and answer the door, housemaids to clean and maintain the rooms, a laundress to handle the endless washing, perhaps a coachman and stable hands if the family keeps horses and carriages. The total annual cost of such a staff might reach $15,000 or more, a significant expense even for a wealthy banker. But these costs were considered necessary, expected, simply part of maintaining a position in society. A mansion without adequate staff was like a bank without tellers, unable to function properly regardless of how much money stood behind it. The servants made possible the entertaining, the dinner parties and receptions that were essential to business and social advancement. They created the environment of effortless luxury that reassured clients their banker was successful, stable, worthy of trust. Their labour was invisible by design, performed before the family woke or after they retired, in basements and upper floors where the family rarely ventured, but without it the entire structure would collapse. As you climb the staircase, your hand trailing along the polished banister, you pass beneath an enormous skylight set into the ceiling 2 stories above. During the day, this skylight floods the entrance hall with natural light, turning the marble floors into pools of reflected sky. Now, at night, it shows only darkness punctuated by occasional stars, the glass panes creating a grid that frames small sections of the cosmos. The skylight was one of the most expensive elements of the construction, requiring structural engineering to support the weight of its iron frame and glass panels, and special waterproofing to prevent leaks that might damage the precious finishes below. The architect who designed this house spent 18 months developing the plans, revising them repeatedly in consultation with the banker who would pay for their execution. The fee for such architectural services might reach 5% of the total construction cost, perhaps $100,000 for a house that cost $2 million to build. This was a substantial sum, but it covered not just the initial design, but ongoing supervision of construction, coordination with contractors and craftsmen, and the resolution of countless problems that arose during 4 years of building. The general contractor who managed the construction employed as many as 150 workers at the peak of activity, coordinating masons and carpenters, plumbers and electricians, painters and plasterers, glaziers and metal workers. Some of these workers were immigrants recently arrived from Ireland or Italy or Poland, grateful for steady employment at wages that seemed generous compared to what they might have earned at home. Others were native-born craftsmen, men who had learned their trades through apprenticeships and took pride in their work, in their ability to read plans and execute them with precision. The economics of construction in this era were shaped by the availability of this immigrant labour pool. The great wave of European immigration that brought millions to American shores between 1880 and 1914 created a buyer's market for labour. Skilled workers could command decent wages, but there was always competition, always someone willing to work for less if necessary. This kept costs manageable even for projects of extraordinary scale and complexity, making possible the construction boom that transformed American cities in these years. You reach the landing where the 2 flights of the staircase meet and pause to catch your breath. Though the climb was not particularly strenuous, it's more that you need a moment to absorb what you're seeing, to let the beauty of this space settle into your awareness. Behind you, the entrance hall spreads out like a stage set, its marble gleaming, its columns standing patient and strong. Above you, the staircase continues toward the private floors where bedrooms and family spaces await, and around you, the very air seems weighted with expense, with the accumulated cost of materials and labour that transformed raw resources into this palace of banking. The opportunity cost of such a house is staggering when you pause to consider it. $2 million in 1906 could have built 400 modest homes for working families, each one containing 3 or 4 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a parlour. It could have endowed a university with funds sufficient to operate for decades. It could have been invested at 5% interest to generate $100,000 of annual income without touching the principal. The decision to spend such a sum on a single-family dwelling reflects a particular set of values, a belief that the display of wealth serves purposes beyond mere shelter, that architecture makes arguments about power and permanence that words cannot convey. And yet standing here, surrounded by the results of that spending, it's difficult not to be moved by the sheer beauty of what was created. The craftsmen who shaped this marble and wood were not thinking about economic arguments or social justice. They were thinking about their work, about making each joint tight and each surface smooth, about creating something that would outlast their own brief lives by generations. In this sense, the house transcends its origins in inequality and excess, becoming a testament to human skill and the drive to make beautiful things simply because we can. You turn from the landing and continue up the 2nd flight of stairs, your feet sinking slightly into carpet that runs down the centre of each step. The carpet is red, a deep crimson that glows warmly in the gaslight, and its pile is so thick you can feel the luxury of it, even through your shoes. This carpet was woven in Brussels to specifications provided by the architect, its pattern incorporating classical motifs that echo the carved details of the plasterwork. The cost was perhaps $20 per yard, and the staircase required 30 yards or more, another $500 or $600 added to the vast total. At the top of the stairs, you reach the 2nd floor and find yourself in a wide corridor that stretches in both directions. Doorways open into rooms whose purposes you can only guess at from this vantage point, and more stairs lead upward to the 3rd and 4th floors where bedrooms and private chambers await. The entrance hall is below you now, its marble floor far beneath your feet, and you realise that you've completed the first stage of your journey into the heart of this house. The construction of this mansion employed not just the workers who laid stone and shaped wood, but hundreds of others whose labour was less visible. Quarry workers in Italy and Belgium and Vermont cutting the stone and slate, foresters in the Midwest felling the walnut and oak, factory workers producing the brass fixtures and iron railings, glassmakers crafting the windows and skylights, painters mixing pigments, all of them connected by the flow of money from the bankers' accounts, by purchase orders and bills of lading, by the vast commercial network that made such a project possible. This single house, in other words, was never truly singular. It was the visible peak of an economic pyramid that spread outward to touch thousands of lives, from the Italian sculptor who carved the column capitals to the Brooklyn metalworker who forged the railings to the Belgian weaver who made the carpets. The $2 million did not disappear into the mansion's walls. It flowed out into the economy, paying wages and purchasing materials, supporting families and funding other projects in an endless circulation that is the essence of capitalism itself. And now, decades later, the house stands as evidence of that circulation, of that moment when American wealth reached a concentration and confidence that expressed itself in marble halls and gilded ceilings. You're standing inside an economic argument made three-dimensional, a statement in stone and wood about what money can buy and what it cannot. It can buy beauty, certainly, and comfort, and the satisfaction of knowing that skilled hands shaped every surface you see. But it cannot buy permanence, cannot hold back the changes that time and circumstance will bring, cannot finally protect those who built it from the universal levelling that awaits us all. For now, though, the house stands intact, every surface maintained, every lamp lit, every detail exactly as the architect and builder intended. And you, standing at the top of the grand staircase in the quiet of midnight, are given the rare gift of seeing it without crowds or ceremony, without the bustle of servants or the demands of social performance. You can simply breathe and observe and let the accumulated weight of wealth and work settle over you gently, like a blanket woven from silk and golden thread. The corridor stretches before you, inviting you deeper into the mansion's secrets. There are more rooms to see, more stories to hear, more quiet corners where the history of American finance has left its traces. But there is no rush. The night is long and the house is patient, and your journey through it has only just begun. You turn to the left and walk slowly down the corridor, your footsteps absorbed by more of that thick Brussels carpet. The walls here are panelled in dark wood, walnut or perhaps mahogany, their surfaces glowing with the deep lustre that comes from years of careful polishing. Sconces hold electric bulbs now, not gas flames, and their steady light reveals details that flickering gas might obscure. The electricity is new, installed perhaps only 2 or 3 years ago, and it represents another substantial investment in this house's continual modernisation. The first door you come to stands slightly ajar, and through the opening you can see the unmistakable shelves of a library. You push the door gently and it swings open on silent hinges, revealing a room that seems designed for both scholarship and power, for the quiet contemplation of books and the decisive management of fortunes. The library occupies a corner of the mansion, giving it windows on 2 walls, though now at midnight those windows show only darkness and the faint reflection of the room itself. The walls that do not hold windows are lined with bookcases from floor to ceiling, their shelves crafted from the same dark wood as the corridor panelling. The books themselves number in the thousands, their leather spines creating bands of colour, deep reds and greens and browns punctuated by the gold lettering of titles and authors. You step inside and the door closes softly behind you. The room feels different from the grand entrance hall, more intimate despite its substantial size. The ceiling here is perhaps 12 feet high, coffered with decorative plasterwork picked out in subtle tones of cream and gold. A fireplace occupies the centre of one wall, its mantel carved from marble in a simpler style than the elaborate work downstairs. The grate holds logs ready to be lit, though the room is warm enough without a fire, heated by radiators that tick gently as hot water circulates through them. At the centre of the room stands a desk of truly magnificent proportions. It is made from mahogany, its surface perhaps 6 feet wide and 4 feet deep, providing ample space for the spreading out of documents and ledgers. The desk was custom built for this room by a furniture maker in Grand Rapids, Michigan, a craftsman whose reputation for quality attracted clients from across the country. The cost would have been several $1,000s, a sum that seems excessive until you consider that this desk is not merely furniture but a tool, the place where decisions involving millions of dollars are made daily. The desk's surface is covered in green leather, tooled around the edges with a gold pattern, and the leather shows the slight wear that comes from years of use, from papers shuffled and pens laid down, from hands resting on its surface during long hours of work. Behind the desk, a chair upholstered in matching leather waits with the patience of inanimate objects, its seat shaped by the body of the man who sits there day after day, managing portfolios that could fund small nations. You walk around the desk slowly, trailing your fingers along its edge, feeling the cool smoothness of the wood. On the desk's surface sit several items that speak to the nature of the work performed here. An inkwell of cut crystal holds black ink, its surface undisturbed. A pen rests beside it, its nib gold, its barrel made from ebony. A leather blotter shows the ghostly impressions of signatures and calculations, mirror images of transactions completed and recorded, and here a stack of leather-bound ledgers, their spines labelled with years and categories: securities, loans, property, accounts. These ledgers represent the actual mechanism of private banking in this era, before computers or even mechanical calculators made record-keeping electronic or automatic. Every transaction is recorded by hand, in careful script, by clerks employed specifically for their penmanship and attention to detail. The banker reviews these ledgers regularly, checking balances and positions, making decisions about where to deploy capital and which opportunities to pursue. The economics of information in this era are shaped by the speed of human handwriting, by the time required to copy figures from one ledger to another, by the inevitable errors that creep in despite the most careful procedures. Along one wall of the library, between the bookcases, a large safe is built into the wall itself. The safe door is visible, a circle of polished steel perhaps 3 feet in diameter, decorated with the maker's name in ornate script and fitted with a combination lock whose brass dial gleams in the electric light. This safe holds documents too valuable or too sensitive to be kept anywhere else. Bearer bonds worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, stock certificates representing ownership in railways and factories, property deeds, contracts, private correspondence regarding business matters that must not become public. The psychology of such a safe is interesting to consider. The combination is known only to the banker himself and perhaps one trusted servant, a precaution against theft, but also against the simple human tendency to discuss matters better kept private. The safe's presence in his private library rather than in a bank vault speaks to an era when wealthy men conducted significant business from their homes, when the boundary between personal and professional life was more fluid than it would later become. You settle into the leather chair behind the desk, feeling it accept your weight, and for a moment you imagine what it must be like to sit here regularly, to begin each morning reviewing the previous day's positions and the morning's correspondence, to spend hours making decisions that will affect thousands of people you will never meet. The responsibility must be extraordinary, the pressure unrelenting, and yet men sought these positions, competed for them, because along with responsibility came power, and along with power came the satisfaction of shaping the economic landscape according to one's own vision. The banker who sits in this chair manages perhaps $50 million on behalf of himself and his clients. This is wealth on a scale difficult to comprehend, equivalent to perhaps $1.5 billion today when you account for inflation and economic growth. But the number itself matters less than what it represents. The ability to make things happen, to say yes to a railway that will open new territory, to say no to a speculation that seems too risky, to move capital from one opportunity to another with the stroke of a pen. His typical day begins early, perhaps 7 in the morning, when he comes to this library to read the newspapers and review overnight cables from European markets. By 9, he's at his office in the financial district, a suite of rooms in a building whose address carries prestige and whose proximity to other banks facilitates the constant communication that banking requires. He meets with clients, reviews loan applications, consults with partners and subordinates. He takes lunch at his club, where business is discussed between courses and deals are sometimes concluded over brandy and cigars. He returns to the office for the afternoon, perhaps attending a meeting of a corporate board on which he serves, and then, by 6 or 7 in the evening, he comes home to this library, where he spends another hour or two reviewing the day's work before joining his family for dinner. The economics of such a schedule are revealing. The banker's formal salary might be modest, perhaps $20,000 or $30,000 per year, but this understates his true compensation. He receives fees for arranging loans, percentages of the capital he manages, seats on boards that pay additional stipends. More importantly, he has access to investment opportunities before they become public, the ability to participate in syndicates that purchase securities at advantageous prices and sell them to the public at a profit. His true annual income might reach several $100,000 or more, placing him among the wealthiest 0.1% of the population. But tonight, sitting in his chair in the quiet of midnight, you're thinking of a particular evening in October of 1907, an evening when this library became the site of a different kind of work, more urgent and more consequential than the daily management of portfolios. October of 1907 was a month of growing crisis in American financial markets. The trouble had been building for months, the inevitable result of excessive speculation and insufficient liquidity in the banking system. Trust companies, lightly regulated institutions that accepted deposits and made loans but operated outside the traditional banking structure, had grown rapidly and taken increasingly risky positions. Stock market speculation had reached fevered heights, with shares trading on margin and borrowed money chasing increasingly dubious opportunities. The trigger came in mid-October, when a speculative scheme to corner the market in shares of United Copper Company collapsed spectacularly. The speculators had borrowed heavily to purchase shares, betting that they could force the price up and profit from short sellers who would be compelled to buy at inflated prices. But the scheme failed. The price fell instead of rising, and the speculators were ruined. More importantly, the banks and trust companies that had lent them money suddenly faced serious losses. On Tuesday, October 22, 1907, depositors began lining up outside the Knickerbocker Trust Company, one of New York's largest and most respected financial institutions. Rumors had spread that Knickerbocker had been involved in the copper speculation, that its assets were impaired, that it might not be able to return deposits on demand. The rumors were only partially true, but in banking, perception matters more than reality. If depositors believe a bank is in trouble, they rush to withdraw their money, and the resulting run can destroy even a fundamentally sound institution. By the end of that Tuesday, Knickerbocker had paid out millions of dollars to panicked depositors. By Wednesday morning, it had exhausted its cash reserves and was forced to close its doors. The failure of such a prominent institution sent shockwaves through the entire financial system. If Knickerbocker could fail, any institution might fail. Depositors began withdrawing funds from other trust companies, then from banks, creating a cascade of financial pressure that threatened to collapse the entire structure. The problem, at its core, was one of liquidity. The banks and trust companies held assets that were fundamentally valuable, loans secured by real property, securities representing ownership in productive enterprises, but these assets could not be quickly converted to cash. When depositors demanded their money, the institutions had to sell these assets at distressed prices or borrow from other institutions that were themselves under pressure. Interest rates for overnight loans spiked to 100% or more, a level that made borrowing nearly impossible and forced institutions to sell assets at ever larger losses. In a modern financial system, the central bank would step in at this point, lending freely to solvent institutions against good collateral, providing the liquidity needed to stop the panic. But in 1907, the United States had no central bank. The Federal Reserve would not be created until 1913, and its absence meant that there was no institutional lender of last resort, no entity with the authority and resources to stabilize the system in crisis. What America had instead was a handful of extraordinarily wealthy private bankers, men who commanded sufficient resources and respect to organize rescue efforts on their own authority. And the most powerful of these men lived in a mansion very much like the one you're sitting in now, in a library very much like this one, behind a desk where decisions involving the entire nation's financial stability were made. On the evening of October 23rd, with the crisis deepening and additional failures threatened for the next morning, a group of New York's most prominent bankers gathered in a private library to devise a solution. They met not at a bank or a government building, but in a home, because that's where such men worked when the stakes were highest and the decisions most consequential. The room would have been much like this one, lined with books and warmed by a fire, the air thick with cigar smoke and the tension of men who understood that they were all that stood between the financial system and collapse. The banker who convened this meeting, the one whose library hosted these deliberations, was perhaps 60 years old, white-haired and heavy-set, with the manner of a man accustomed to being obeyed. He did not ask his colleagues what they thought should be done. He told them what must be done, and his authority was such that they listened. The trust companies needed immediate cash infusions to stop the runs. The stock exchange needed loans to prevent a collapse in share prices that would trigger additional margin calls and forced sales. The banks needed coordination to ensure they all acted together rather than competing, to save themselves at others' expense. The amount required was enormous, perhaps $25 million to be raised immediately, with more likely needed in the days ahead. No single institution could provide such a sum, but collectively, if they all agreed to participate, the assembled banks could manage it. The negotiations went on for hours, each bank calculating what it could afford to contribute, what its exposure might be if the crisis continued, what the consequences would be if they failed to act. The economics of this moment are fascinating to contemplate. These bankers were competitors, men who vied for clients and opportunities, who guarded their own interests jealously. And yet they understood that their individual interest was subordinate to the health of the system as a whole. If the financial system collapsed, their own wealth would be imperiled no matter how conservatively they had managed their institutions. The only rational choice was cooperation, was collective action, was temporary alliance against a common threat. By midnight, an agreement had been reached. Each bank pledged specific amounts, with the largest and strongest contributing the most. The money would be available the next morning, deposited with the trust companies to meet withdrawals and with brokers to support the stock market. Additional funds would be held in reserve, to be deployed if the crisis spread to other institutions. The bankers signed agreements, made arrangements for the actual transfer of funds, and finally, exhausted, went home to catch a few hours of sleep before what promised to be another difficult day. The intervention worked, though not immediately. The next few days saw continued pressure, additional failures among smaller institutions, moments when it seemed the crisis might spiral beyond control. But the commitment of resources by the major banks provided a floor beneath the panic, a signal that the system would be defended, and gradually confidence began to return. By early November, the worst was over. Depositors stopped withdrawing funds, stock prices stabilized, and interest rates for overnight loans fell back toward normal levels. The total cost of the intervention was never precisely calculated, but it certainly ran into the tens of millions of dollars in loans and guarantees provided by private banks. Some of these loans were eventually repaid in full, others at partial losses, and a few were written off entirely. But the alternative, a complete collapse of the financial system, would have cost far more in destroyed wealth and disrupted commerce. The private bankers had acted as a lender of last resort, performing a function that in other countries was handled by central banks, and while they were motivated partly by self-interest, their actions undoubtedly prevented a crisis from becoming a catastrophe. The Panic of 1907 had lasting consequences for American financial regulation. The crisis demonstrated the fragility of a system without a central bank, the dangers of relying on private individuals to perform public functions. Within 6 years, Congress would create the Federal Reserve System, giving the nation an institutional lender of last resort with the power to inject liquidity during crises and regulate banks to prevent excessive speculation. The age of private banking power, of fortunes managed from libraries in Fifth Avenue mansions, would begin its gradual decline, replaced by institutional banking with professional management and government oversight. But sitting here in this library at midnight, in the year 1907, none of that future is visible. The banker who works at this desk is at the height of his power, his judgment sought by presidents and railroad magnates, his decisions shaping the flow of capital across a continent. The leather chair you're sitting in has supported him through countless hours of work, through crises managed and opportunities seized, through the daily exercise of financial power that most people can barely imagine. You lean back in the chair, feeling its comfort, and let your eyes wander around the room. The books on the shelves represent decades of accumulated learning, everything from Greek philosophy to modern economics, from history to poetry, to technical treatises on finance and law. Many of these volumes have never been opened, purchased by the yard to fill the shelves and create an atmosphere of learning. But others show signs of use, their spines creased and their pages marked, evidence that the man who works here is not merely wealthy but educated, not merely powerful but thoughtful. On a side table near the fireplace, you notice a humidor, its polished wood gleaming in the electric light. Inside would be Cuban cigars, each one costing perhaps 50 cents or $1, luxury tobacco reserved for evenings of contemplation or celebration. Beside the humidor sits a crystal decanter filled with amber liquid, probably brandy or whiskey, the kind of spirits that wealthy men sip while reviewing the day's transactions or planning tomorrow's moves. The economics of such luxuries are trivial in the context of a fortune measured in millions, but they represent something important about the life lived in these rooms, the combination of work and pleasure, of responsibility and indulgence, of serious purpose, leavened by sensory comfort. The clock on the mantelpiece strikes the quarter hour, its chimes soft and melodious, measuring time in a room where time is measured ultimately in interest compounded, in opportunities seized or missed. in the slow accumulation of wealth across days and months and years. The sound reminds you that the night is passing, that this journey through the mansion continues, that there are other rooms waiting to reveal their secrets. You rise from the leather chair, feeling your muscles stretch after several minutes of sitting, and take one last look around the library. This is where empires were calculated, where crises were managed, where the abstract world of finance intersected with the physical world of marble mansions and leather-bound ledgers. This is where a man came each evening to review his positions and plan his strategies, to exercise the power that money confers and to bear the burdens that such power inevitably brings. The door to the corridor waits, slightly open, inviting you to continue your exploration. Beyond it lie other rooms, other stories, other moments when wealth and power found physical expression in architecture and decoration. But for now, you simply stand in the quiet of the library, breathing in air that seems weighted with decisions made and consequences faced, with numbers calculated and risks weighed, with the serious work of moving money through a nation hungry for capital. The books wait on their shelves, the ledgers rest on the desk, the safe holds its secrets behind steel and brass. And you, having glimpsed the machinery of private banking at its height, turn toward the door and whatever lies beyond, carrying with you the knowledge of how fortunes were managed in the quiet of midnight, in libraries built for both contemplation and command. You step back into the corridor, pulling the library door closed behind you with a soft click that echoes briefly in the carpeted space. The electric lights along the walls cast their steady glow, so different from the flickering warmth of gaslight, and you find yourself appreciating the banker's decision to embrace this new technology despite its expense. The installation of electricity throughout a house of this size would have cost $20,000 or $30,000, requiring miles of copper wire threaded through walls and ceilings, junction boxes and switches carefully placed, fixtures selected and fitted. But the result is this clean, constant illumination that makes the nighttime hours feel less like darkness conquered, and more like a different kind of day, quieter and more contemplative. Further along the corridor, you come to a doorway wider than the others, its frame more elaborate, suggesting that what lies beyond is meant for display rather than private work. You push the door open and find yourself at the entrance to a long gallery, perhaps 60 feet in length, its walls covered in silk damask of deep burgundy and hung with paintings and gilded frames. This is the picture gallery, and even in the dim light of evening you can sense the extraordinary value concentrated in this single room. The gallery runs along the side of the house, with windows on one wall that during daylight would flood the space with natural light. Now those windows are dark mirrors, reflecting the room back upon itself, doubling the paintings and creating an illusion of infinite multiplication. The opposite wall is solid, providing uninterrupted hanging space, and the ceiling rises higher than in the library, perhaps 15 feet, giving the paintings room to breathe and allowing viewers to step back and take in their full effect. You begin walking slowly along the gallery, your footsteps muffled by yet another oriental carpet, this one perhaps from Persia, its pattern of deep reds and blues and golds flowing beneath your feet like a frozen garden. The first painting you pause before is a portrait, a man in dark clothing against a darker background, only his face and hands emerging from shadow to catch the light. The style is unmistakably Dutch, from the 17th century, that golden age when Amsterdam was the financial capital of the world, and its merchants commissioned portraits to document their success. The painting might be a Rembrandt or might be from his school, one of the many accomplished students who learned to paint in his style, and produced works that occasionally get misattributed to the master himself. The distinction matters economically, if not aesthetically. A genuine Rembrandt in 1907 might be purchased for $50,000 or $60,000 from a European dealer, while a work from his school might cost a tenth of that sum. Both are beautiful, both are historically significant, but the signature determines the price in ways that have little to do with the quality of the paint on canvas. The banker who assembled this collection would have relied on experts to authenticate his purchases, men who had studied the techniques and materials of old masters, who could distinguish original brushwork from later editions or copies. These experts, often European scholars with prestigious academic credentials, commanded substantial fees for their services. Bernard Berenson, the most famous connoisseur of Italian Renaissance art in this era, might charge several $1,000s to examine a single painting and provide a written attribution. His letters of authentication could multiply a painting's value tenfold, making his fee a negligible cost relative to the value he created or confirmed. The art market in the Gilded Age was shaped by a fortunate conjunction of supply and demand. European aristocrats facing declining agricultural revenues and rising costs were selling art to maintain their lifestyles. American industrialists and bankers, flush with new wealth and eager to establish cultural legitimacy, were buying. The intermediaries who connected these groups, dealers like the Duveen brothers, made fortunes facilitating transactions that satisfied both parties while taking substantial commissions for themselves. Joseph Duveen, who would eventually become Lord Duveen, perfected the art of selling old masters to American millionaires. He understood that his clients were buying not just paintings, but identity, association with the great collectors and patrons of history. He cultivated relationships with both sellers and buyers, maintaining showrooms in London, Paris, and New York, and he was not above gentle deception when it served his purposes. A painting acquired for $20,000 might be sold for $80,000, with the difference justified by vague references to restoration costs and the challenges of exportation. You move along the gallery, passing from the Dutch painting to an Italian work, perhaps from the 16th century. This one shows a Madonna with child, the figures idealized and serene, painted with the technical perfection that characterized the High Renaissance. The gold leaf in the halos still catches the light after 400 years, and the ultramarine blue of the Madonna's robe, made from ground lapis lazuli imported from Afghanistan at great expense, retains its intensity. To create such a blue in the 16th century required a pigment that cost more per ounce than gold, and painters reserved it for only the most important elements of their compositions. The economics of pigment reveal something essential about the relationship between art and commerce. Before the Industrial Revolution made synthetic colours available, painters depended on natural materials that varied wildly in cost. Earth pigments like ochres and umbers were cheap, available from local sources, while brilliant reds from crushed cochineal insects or deep blues from lapis lazuli were precious commodities that travelled thousands of miles to reach artists' workshops. The choice of colours was not purely aesthetic but also economic, with patrons sometimes specifying in contracts which pigments could be used and which were too expensive to justify. Next to the Madonna hangs a landscape, a pastoral scene with shepherds and sheep, classical ruins in the middle distance, and mountains beyond fading into atmospheric perspective. This is the kind of painting that wealthy collectors in the 18th century acquired to decorate their country houses, representations of an idealized antiquity that never quite existed, but fulfilled a psychological need for connection to classical civilization. The painting might have been commissioned originally for a few £100s, hung for generations in an English manor house, and sold at auction in the early 20th century for 10 or 20 times its original price. The appreciation of art is one of the more remarkable features of the economics of collecting. Unlike most goods, which depreciate with age and use, paintings by recognized masters tend to increase in value over time, sometimes dramatically. A work purchased for $5,000 in 1900 might sell for $50,000 by 1950 and $5 million by 2000. This makes art an inflation hedge, a store of value that preserves wealth across generations in ways that currency or even gold cannot always match. But the appreciation is far from uniform. Tastes change, reputations rise and fall, and paintings by artists celebrated in one era might be dismissed or forgotten in the next. The art market is shaped by fashion and scholarship, by new discoveries that elevate forgotten painters or revelations that demote presumed masters. The Dutch portraits that commanded high prices in the 19th century fell out of favour in the early 20th, while French Impressionist works that initially struggled to find buyers became some of the most valuable paintings in the world. The banker assembling this collection in 1907 could not know which of his purchases would prove to be wise investments and which would languish in value. You come to a painting that is clearly more recent than the others, its style looser and more impressionistic, its colours brighter and less constrained by academic conventions. This might be a work by an American artist, one of the painters who studied in Paris and brought back new techniques and new ways of seeing. The art market for contemporary American work was still developing in this era, with prices far below those commanded by European old masters. A painting like this might have cost a few $1,000s directly from the artist's studio, a sum that seems modest compared to the $50,000 paid for a Renaissance masterpiece, but still represents several years of wages for an ordinary worker. The decision to collect contemporary art alongside old masters speaks to a certain adventurousness in taste, a willingness to bet on living artists whose reputations are still being established. Some of these bets would pay off handsomely as American art gained international recognition in the decades ahead. Others would prove to be expensive mistakes, works by artists whose moment of fame was brief, and whose paintings would eventually be relegated to storage or sold at substantial losses. Between the paintings, you notice details of the gallery's construction and decoration. The walls are covered in silk damask, a fabric that provides a rich background for the gilded frames while absorbing sound and creating a sense of luxury. The silk alone would have cost several $1,000s, and it requires regular maintenance to prevent fading and deterioration. The ceiling is decorated with plasterwork, classical motifs and geometric patterns picked out in cream and gold, and the effect is of a space designed specifically for the display and contemplation of art. At regular intervals, pedestals hold classical sculptures, bronze or marble figures copied from ancient works or created in neoclassical style. These sculptures serve both aesthetic and practical purposes, breaking up the wall space and providing resting points for the eye as it moves through the gallery. A bronze figure of Apollo, perhaps 3 feet tall, might have cost $5,000, cast from a mould taken from a famous original in Rome and finished by skilled craftsmen who understood how to apply patinas that gave the impression of age. The lighting in the gallery deserves particular attention. Electric bulbs are concealed behind valances near the ceiling, providing indirect illumination that washes the walls without creating glare on the painted surfaces. During the day, heavy curtains over the windows can be drawn to control the natural light, protecting the paintings from the sun's damaging rays, while still allowing visitors to see them clearly. The installation of this lighting system would have required consultation with specialists who understood both electricity and conservation, men whose expertise commanded premium fees. You pause in the centre of the gallery, equidistant from both ends, and turn slowly to take in the full effect. The room contains perhaps 20 paintings, each one representing a significant investment, together forming a collection worth several $100,000 at minimum. But the value is not merely monetary. These works connect their owner to the great tradition of European art, to the patronage of Renaissance princes and Baroque cardinals, to the collectors of the 18th century who assembled the first great private galleries. The transformation of such private collections into public museums is one of the more interesting economic stories of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Men who assembled these collections partly for their own pleasure and partly for the prestige they conferred would eventually donate them to museums, transforming private wealth into public cultural resources. The Frick Collection in New York, opened to the public after Henry Clay Frick's death, preserves not just his art, but the domestic setting in which he displayed it. The Morgan Library, created from the collection of another wealthy banker, gives scholars and visitors access to manuscripts and books that might otherwise have remained locked in private hands. The motivations for such donations were mixed. Genuine philanthropy played a role, a desire to share beauty and knowledge with future generations. But tax considerations were also important. As income and estate taxes increased in the early 20th century, the donation of art to museums became an efficient way to reduce tax liability while preserving a family's cultural legacy. The value of the donation could be deducted from taxable income or estate value, making the effective cost of the gift far less than its nominal value. The economics of this arrangement benefited everyone involved. The donor received tax relief and public recognition. The museum received works it could never have afforded to purchase. And the public gained access to cultural treasures that private ownership would have kept hidden. It was a solution that acknowledged the tension between private property rights and the public interest in cultural heritage, finding a middle ground that preserved incentives for collecting while ensuring that the results of that collecting would eventually be shared. You walk slowly toward the far end of the gallery, where a doorway leads deeper into the house. Before you reach it, you pause before one last painting, a portrait of a young woman in 18th century dress, her expression serene, her pose formal yet somehow intimate. The painting might be by Thomas Gainsborough or Joshua Reynolds, the great English portraitists whose works were highly sought after by American collectors. The woman depicted is long dead, her life and concerns dissolved into history, but her image persists, preserved by pigment and canvas, by the skill of the artist and the care of successive owners. There is something profoundly moving about standing before such a portrait at midnight, in a house that will itself eventually pass into history, become a museum, or be demolished to make way for something new. All the wealth concentrated in this gallery, all the care taken in selecting and displaying these works, all the pleasure they have given to their various owners across centuries, all of this will continue in some form, but transformed, recontextualized, made part of new narratives that we cannot yet imagine. The paintings hang in their gilded frames, patient and permanent, indifferent to the economic fluctuations that determine their value in any particular moment. They were made to last, created with techniques refined over centuries, and with proper care they will endure for centuries more. The ultramarine blue will keep its depth, the gold leaf will continue to catch the light, the faces will gaze out from their dark backgrounds with the same expressions that the artist gave them so long ago. You take a deep breath, feeling the particular air of the gallery fill your lungs. It smells faintly of old canvas and varnish, of the oils that were used in painting and the materials used in restoration, of wood and silk and the accumulated presence of beautiful things kept safe for generations. This is what wealth can preserve, not just objects, but the skill and care that went into making them, the human impulse toward beauty and meaning that transcends mere survival. The doorway at the end of the gallery beckons, and beyond it you can glimpse another corridor, more rooms, the continuing architecture of money made manifest in marble and wood and carefully chosen art. But before you leave this space, you turn for one last look at the paintings hanging in their orderly progression, each one a window into another time and place, each one a small monument to the belief that beauty matters, that art elevates, that the cultivation of taste is a worthy use of wealth. The economics of art collecting will continue to evolve, prices rising and falling with changes in taste and economic conditions, new collectors emerging to replace old ones, new museums founded to house new donations. But the essential transaction remains constant. Someone creates beauty, someone else recognizes and preserves it, and through this exchange, both creator and collector achieve a kind of immortality, their names linked forever to works that outlast their brief lives by centuries. You walk through the doorway, leaving the gallery behind but carrying with you the images you have seen, the faces and landscapes and Madonnas that populate this banker's private museum. The house continues to unfold before you, each room revealing new aspects of how wealth expresses itself, how money becomes architecture, becomes art, becomes legacy. And the night, still deep and unhurried, holds space for all these revelations, offering them gently to anyone willing to walk slowly enough to receive them. The corridor beyond the picture gallery curves gently, following the architecture of the house, and you notice that the floor here is not carpeted but polished wood, parquet laid in herringbone patterns that catch the light and seem to guide your footsteps forward. The wood is likely oak, American oak from forests in the Midwest, each plank carefully selected for its grain and colour, fitted together by craftsmen who took pride in creating surfaces so smooth and true that walking across them feels like gliding. You come to a pair of doors, taller and wider than the others you have passed, their surfaces decorated with carved panels depicting fruits and flowers, classical motifs of abundance and hospitality. These doors are designed to be opened simultaneously by footmen standing on either side, creating a dramatic entrance for guests arriving at dinner parties. But tonight they stand slightly ajar, requiring only a gentle push to swing open on hinges so well balanced that they move without sound or resistance. The dining room reveals itself slowly as the doors part, and your breath catches slightly at the scale of the space. This is not a room for intimate family meals, but for grand entertaining, for dinner parties that bring together 24 guests at a single table, for evenings that mix business with pleasure and cement relationships through the sharing of exceptional food and wine. The room occupies what must be the full width of the house, with windows on one side that would look out over the street during daylight, and a long wall opposite hung with tapestries that soften the acoustics and create an atmosphere of old-world luxury. At the centre of the room stands the table, and it dominates the space completely. The table is perhaps 25 feet long and 5 feet wide, crafted from mahogany so dark and richly figured that it seems to hold its own light. The surface has been polished until it gleams like still water, and you can see your reflection in it as you approach, ghostly and indistinct in the dim illumination from the electric sconces on the walls. The table could accommodate 24 guests comfortably, 12 on each long side, with the host at one end and the hostess at the other, positioned to oversee the meal and guide conversation across the length of polished wood. The chairs that surround the table are upholstered in burgundy velvet, their frames carved from matching mahogany, and their backs high enough to provide support during meals that might last 2 or 3 hours. Each chair represents days of skilled labour by furniture makers who understood joinery and proportions, who could carve decorative elements that were both beautiful and structurally sound. The cost of such chairs might run to several $100s each, meaning that the seating alone represents an investment of $5,000 or $6,000, a sum that could purchase a modest house in a smaller city. You run your hand along the back of one chair, feeling the smoothness of the velvet, the solidity of the frame beneath. These chairs have supported countless guests over the years, diplomats and industrialists, fellow bankers and their wives, politicians and artists, anyone whose presence might advance the host's interest or enrich his social circle. The seating arrangement at such dinners was a matter of careful calculation, with place cards positioned to encourage certain conversations and create opportunities for connection between guests who might benefit from knowing each other. The economics of social networking in this era are fascinating to contemplate. Before telephones became ubiquitous, before business travel became routine, much of the relationship building that drove commerce took place at dinner tables like this one. A banker might invite a railway president, a steel manufacturer, and a politician to the same dinner, creating conditions for deals that would benefit all parties. The cost of the meal and its preparation was trivial compared to the value of the transactions it might facilitate, the partnerships it might forge, the information it might convey. On the table, even though no meal is currently being served, you can see evidence of the tableware that would be used for such entertaining. Candlesticks in silver, perhaps a dozen of them, their surfaces reflecting the electric light in ways that hint at how they would glow when candles burned in them. The silver came from a workshop in New York, specialists who created custom pieces for wealthy clients, and each candlestick might have cost $50 or more. The total investment in silver for this dining room, including serving pieces and flatware stored elsewhere, could easily reach $10,000 or $15,000. The china is visible too, displayed in a cabinet against one wall, its glass doors allowing you to admire patterns without touching. The plates are French, from Limoges or Sèvres, decorated with delicate hand painting that depicts flowers or classical scenes. A full dinner service for 24 guests might include 300 or more pieces, accounting for multiple courses each requiring different plates, and the cost could run to several $1,000s. These plates are handled with extraordinary care by the household staff, washed by hand in warm water and dried with soft cloths, stored in padded compartments to prevent chipping or cracking. Beside the china cabinet stands another display case holding glassware, crystal stemware from Bohemia cut with intricate patterns that break light into rainbows. There are glasses for water and glasses for wine, larger ones for red and smaller for white, glasses for champagne and glasses for port, each one designed for its specific purpose, and each one representing hours of skilled craftsmanship. The crystal was cut by hand, by workers who spent years learning to control their tools with sufficient precision to create patterns that were both regular and delicate. A single glass might cost $5 or $10, and a complete service for 24 guests could represent an investment of several thousand more. You walk slowly around the table, imagining it as it would appear for a formal dinner party. The surface would be covered with a damask cloth, Irish linen woven with patterns that catch the light and create texture without overwhelming the eye. The cloth alone might cost several $100s, and the household would own multiple sets to allow for regular laundering and rotation. Down the centre of the table would run arrangements of flowers, perhaps roses from the household's greenhouse or orchids purchased from a specialist grower, their blooms creating islands of colour and fragrance. The cost of flowers for a single dinner might reach $50 or $100, an expense that seems extravagant until you consider that the entire evening might cost $2,000 or $3,000 when all elements are accounted for. The menu for such a dinner would follow French haute cuisine conventions with multiple courses served over several hours. The meal might begin with oysters, shipped on ice from Long Island beds and presented on silver platters. A soup course would follow, perhaps consommé clarified to perfect transparency, or bisque, enriched with cream and cognac. Then fish, turbot, or sole prepared with delicate sauces. Then an entree, perhaps saddle of lamb or beef tenderloin, accompanied by carefully chosen vegetables. A palate-cleansing sorbet might come next, flavoured with champagne or citrus. Then game, duck or venison prepared according to seasonal availability. Salad would follow, simple greens dressed with vinegar and oil. Then cheese, a selection of French imports that would require its own specialised storage. And finally dessert, elaborate confections of pastry and cream, followed by fruits and coffee. The cost of such a meal, when you account for the quality of ingredients required, might reach $20 or $30 per guest. For a party of 24, that represents $600 or $700 for the food alone, not counting the wine. And the wine would be substantial, with different bottles selected to complement each course. Champagne to begin, white wines with the fish, red wines with the meat and game, dessert wines with the sweets, and cognac or port to conclude. The wine cellar of a house like this might hold several thousand bottles, representing an investment of $20,000 or $30,000, and a single dinner could consume dozens of bottles valued at several $100s total. The staff required to execute such a dinner represents another significant cost. The cook and her assistants would begin preparations hours or even days in advance, roasting stocks and preparing sauces, cleaning and trimming meats, creating the elaborate desserts that characterized French cuisine. On the evening of the dinner, perhaps a dozen servants would be actively involved. The butler would oversee service and manage the wine. Footmen would carry plates from the kitchen and present them to guests, working in carefully choreographed movements that made service appear effortless. The cook would work in the kitchen below, coordinating the timing of courses, ensuring that everything emerged at the correct temperature and in the proper sequence. The total labour for such an evening might represent 50 or 100 hours of skilled and semi-skilled work, from the preparation to the serving to the extensive cleaning that would follow. The servants would be paid their regular wages, perhaps $3 or $4 per day for skilled workers and $1 or $2 for others, but the real cost was in maintaining a staff large enough to execute such dinners regularly. The annual cost of employing 20 servants, as mentioned earlier, might reach $15,000, but this allowed the household to entertain frequently, to respond to invitations with reciprocal dinners, to maintain the social position that was essential to business success. The economics of conspicuous consumption were being formalized in these very years by Thorstein Veblen, whose book The Theory of the Leisure Class was published in 1899. Veblen argued that the wealthy consumed expensive goods and services not just for their utility, but as a way of displaying status, of signalling their position in the social hierarchy. A dinner party like the ones held in this room served multiple purposes simultaneously. It provided sustenance, it facilitated business relationships, and it demonstrated the host's wealth and sophistication. The extravagance was not incidental, but essential to the dinner's function as a social and economic tool. After dinner, the guests would divide according to gender, following a custom that might seem strange to modern sensibilities, but served important purposes in this era. The ladies would retire to a drawing room upstairs, where they would take coffee and engage in conversation deemed suitable for female company. The gentlemen would remain in the dining room or move to a smoking room, where cigars and brandy would be served, and where business matters could be discussed more directly than was possible at the mixed-gender dinner table. This separation created opportunities for frank discussion of financial matters, for the formation of syndicates to underwrite securities offerings, for the resolution of disputes that required confidentiality. The smoking room might see deals worth millions of dollars concluded with handshakes, with formal contracts to be drawn up later by lawyers. The informal atmosphere, the relaxation induced by good food and wine, the camaraderie of men who saw themselves as part of an elite fraternity, all of this made possible transactions that would have been difficult to arrange in the formal setting of an office. You walk to one end of the table where the host would sit and imagine looking down its length at assembled guests, at the glittering crystal and gleaming silver, at the faces animated by conversation and the gentle glow of candlelight. The responsibility of hosting such dinners must have been considerable, requiring not just financial resources but social skill, the ability to draw out quiet guests and moderate dominating ones, to guide conversation toward productive topics and away from controversy that might create awkwardness. The household's reputation depended partly on the quality of its entertaining, on whether meals were prepared perfectly and served smoothly, on whether the wines were well chosen and properly aged, on whether guests departed satisfied with the evening and eager to reciprocate. The mistress of the house would work closely with the cook and housekeeper to plan menus and coordinate details, her oversight essential to success, even though she would never enter the kitchen herself on the evening of the dinner. On the wall opposite the windows, a tapestry depicts a hunting scene, figures on horseback pursuing deer through a forest rendered in subtle tones of green and gold. The tapestry is probably Flemish, from the 17th or 18th century, woven on large looms by craftsmen who spent years completing a single work. Such tapestries were valuable then, and have only appreciated since, their rarity and the skill required to create them ensuring that they command high prices whenever they appear at auction. This one might have cost $5,000 or $10,000 when it was purchased, and today would be worth many times that amount. You notice that the room is warmer than some of the others you have passed through, heated by radiators concealed behind decorative grilles that maintain temperature without the mess and labour of fireplaces. The economics of heating a house of this size are substantial, with coal or oil consumed in large quantities during the winter months, but the comfort provided is considered essential. Guests arriving for dinner in evening clothes of silk and light wool cannot be expected to endure cold rooms, and the maintenance of consistent temperature is another service that wealth provides invisibly. The dining room windows are hung with heavy curtains of dark velvet, their fabric rich and light-absorbing, designed to provide privacy and acoustical dampening during evening meals. During the day, these curtains would be tied back to admit natural light, but at night they create an enclosed world, cutting off the room from the street outside and focusing attention on the table and the people gathered around it. The curtains represent another substantial expense, several $1,000s for the fabric alone, not counting the hardware and labour required to hang them properly. As you prepare to leave the dining room and continue your journey through the mansion, you take one last look at the empty table, trying to imagine it populated with guests filled with conversation and laughter, alive with the rituals of formal dining that were such an important part of this world. The table has witnessed countless such evenings, has supported the weight of silver and crystal and porcelain, has been the silent witness to deals made and relationships forged, to the social machinery that turned wealth into power and power into more wealth. The doors through which you entered stand open, and beyond them the corridor waits, leading deeper into the house, toward the more private spaces where the family's daily life unfolds away from guests and ceremony. You walk toward those doors, your footsteps soft on the parquet floor, leaving the dining room to its silence and its memories of abundance carefully displayed. You step back into the corridor and turn toward the main staircase, sensing that the rooms you seek now are above, on the floor where the family actually lives rather than entertains. The public spaces of the mansion, magnificent as they are, tell only part of the story of the life lived within these walls. To understand the banker as a human being, rather than merely a figure of wealth and power, you must venture into the private apartments where he retreats from the demands of business and society. The staircase rises before you, and you begin to climb, your hand once again trailing along the smooth walnut banister. The steps are gentler here than on the grand staircase in the entrance hall, designed for daily use rather than ceremonial ascent, and you find yourself moving upward almost without effort, your body adapting to the rhythm of the climb. The second floor gives way to the third, and here the character of the house changes noticeably. The ceilings are lower, the corridors narrower, the decoration less ostentatious. These are spaces designed for living rather than impressing. You pass several doors, closed now, that must lead to children's bedrooms or guest rooms, spaces occupied by the next generation or by visitors who come to stay for extended periods. But you're drawn toward the master suite, toward the rooms occupied by the banker and his wife, and you find them at the front of the house, commanding the best views and the most generous proportions available on this floor. The door to the master bedroom stands open, inviting you inside, and you cross the threshold into a space that feels immediately different from everything you have seen so far. Here, finally, is evidence of actual human habitation, of a life lived rather than merely displayed. The room is large but not overwhelming, perhaps 20 feet square, with windows facing Fifth Avenue and a fireplace on the interior wall. The decoration is rich but restrained, suggesting comfort rather than grandeur, rest rather than ceremony. The bed dominates the room, as beds must, and it is a piece of furniture worthy of its central position. The frame is carved mahogany, its headboard rising perhaps 6 feet from the floor and decorated with panels that echo the neoclassical motifs used throughout the house. The mattress is thick, built up from layers of horsehair and cotton batting, supported by springs that were a relatively recent innovation in bedding technology. The whole assemblage sits high enough that a small step stool is positioned nearby to assist in climbing in and out. The bed is made with extraordinary care, the linens crisp and white, the blankets and coverlet arranged in layers that suggest both warmth and weight. The sheets are Irish linen, woven from flax and finished to a softness that can only come from quality fibres and skilled weaving. A set of such sheets might cost $50 or more, and the household would own multiple sets to allow for regular laundering. The blankets are wool, possibly cashmere, their fibres fine enough to provide warmth without excessive weight, and the coverlet is silk, probably imported from France or Italy, quilted in a pattern that creates texture and visual interest. The pillows deserve particular attention, for they represent one of the few areas where genuine luxury intersects with physical comfort in ways that transcend mere display. These pillows are filled with down, the soft underlayer of feathers from geese or ducks, and the quality of down varies considerably depending on its source and processing. The finest down comes from mature birds in cold climates, where they develop particularly thick and fluffy underlayers. Hungarian or Polish down is considered superior, and it commands prices that can reach several dollars per pound. A single pillow might contain a pound or more of down, meaning that the 4 pillows arranged on this bed represent a substantial investment in the quality of sleep. You move closer to the bed, drawn by its promise of rest, and notice the small details that reveal the occupant's personalities and concerns. On the nightstand beside what must be the banker's side of the bed sits a reading lamp, a relatively new electric fixture that can be switched on and off without leaving the bed. Beside the lamp a book lies face down, holding its place, its title obscured but its presence suggesting that, even at the height of his career, the banker makes time for reading before sleep. The book might be a novel, an escape from the pressures of finance, or it might be a treatise on economics or politics, evidence that his mind never fully disengages from the world of money and power. Next to the book, a small leather case holds reading glasses, another concession to aging that even wealth cannot entirely prevent. The banker is perhaps 60 years old now, his eyes less sharp than they once were, requiring magnification for reading fine print or reviewing detailed ledgers. The glasses were made by an optician in New York, fitted specifically to his eyes after careful examination, and they cost perhaps $20 or $30, a small expense but another reminder that the body has its demands regardless of one's bank balance. On the opposite nightstand, presumably the wife's side, you notice different objects. A bottle of perfume, its glass stopper catching the light, containing a scent mixed by a parfumier in Paris according to her personal preferences. A slim volume of poetry, perhaps Wordsworth or Tennyson, suggesting tastes more literary than commercial. A silver frame photograph showing children now grown, captured at some earlier moment when their faces were younger, and the future seemed simpler than it has proven to be. The photograph draws your attention, and you step closer to examine it. 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, posed formally in clothing that dates the image to perhaps 15 or 20 years ago. These are the banker's children, the next generation, and their presence in this room, even in photographic form, speaks to the human ties that persist despite wealth and status. The banker is not just a financial figure but a father, a man who has watched his children grow, who has worried about their health and their education, who has planned for their futures with the same care he brings to managing his clients' fortunes. The economics of raising children in this level of society are substantial but rarely discussed. Each child requires not just food and shelter, but education of the highest quality, social introduction to appropriate circles, and eventually settlement in life through marriage or career. The boys would have attended elite preparatory schools, perhaps boarding at institutions that cost several $1,000s per year, then proceeded to Yale or Harvard, where tuition and expenses might add another $2,000 annually. The daughter would have had governesses and finishing school, a debut into society that could cost $10,000 or $20,000 for the ball and associated expenses, and a dowry or settlement to make her attractive to suitable marriage prospects. The total cost of raising 3 children to successful adulthood in this social stratum could easily exceed $100,000, a sum equivalent to the total lifetime earnings of 20 ordinary workers. And beyond the direct costs, there is the psychological burden of ensuring that the children do not become spoiled by their privilege, that they develop some sense of purpose and responsibility rather than merely consuming their inheritance. This concern weighs on many wealthy parents in this era. The fear that their success might inadvertently cripple their children's ability to find meaning in their own lives. You turn from the photograph and notice a door that must lead to the banker's dressing room, a separate space where his clothing is stored and where he prepares himself each morning for the day ahead. Through the partially open door you can glimpse rows of suits hanging on rails, dozens of shirts arranged by colour and style, shelves holding hats and shoes, and the countless accessories that formal dressing requires. The contents of this dressing room represent thousands of dollars of investment in appearance, in the maintenance of the image that a successful banker must project. But your attention returns to the bedroom itself, to the space where the banker comes at the end of each day to set aside his public persona and exist simply as a tired man in need of rest. Near the fireplace, 2 chairs face each other across a small table, creating an intimate seating area where husband and wife might talk privately before retiring. The chairs are upholstered in a floral fabric, their style suggesting comfort rather than formality, and the table between them holds a lamp and a few books, evidence of quiet evenings spent reading or conversing. The fireplace itself is smaller than those in the public rooms, its surround made of tiles rather than marble, its purpose purely practical rather than decorative. On cold winter nights, a fire would be laid and lit by a servant, providing warmth and the psychological comfort of flame, the ancient human solace of controlled fire keeping darkness and cold at bay. The economics of household. Heating in this era are shaped by the availability of coal delivered by wagon from yards near the rivers, tons of it consumed each winter, its cost absorbed into the general household budget without particular notice. Above the fireplace hangs a painting, not a masterwork from the downstairs gallery, but a family portrait. The banker and his wife and their 3 children posed together perhaps 20 years ago, when the youngest was still small enough to sit on his mother's lap. The banker in the portrait is visibly younger, his hair darker, his face less lined by care and time. His wife is beautiful in the formal way that portrait painters achieved, her dress elegant, her expression serene. The children are arranged according to convention, the oldest standing behind his parents, the middle child to one side, the youngest centred. The painting cost perhaps $5,000 when it was commissioned, a significant expense but one considered appropriate for documenting the family at this particular moment in their lives. Looking at this portrait, you feel the weight of time and mortality that even great wealth cannot lift. The moment captured in paint is gone, irretrievable, transformed by the passage of 20 years into something both more and less than it was. The children are grown now, pursuing their own lives, and the parents are older, changed by experience and loss in ways that the portrait cannot show. Wealth has protected them from many of life's hardships, but not from the universal levelling of age and change. The banker's worries are different from those of ordinary people, but no less real for their difference. He worries about the safety of his capital, about market movements that could diminish the fortune he has spent a lifetime accumulating. He worries about competition from younger men, more aggressive and perhaps less scrupulous, who seek to displace him from his position of influence. He worries about political changes, about the rising tide of antitrust sentiment and progressive reform that threatens the concentration of financial power that men like him represent. In these years, 1906 and 1907, the political climate is turning against the great financiers and industrialists. Journalists write exposés of corporate misconduct and political corruption, publications they call muckraking that reveals uncomfortable truths about how fortunes are made and maintained. Theodore Roosevelt, the president, speaks publicly about the need to regulate trusts and break up monopolies, even as he relies on men like this banker to manage the nation's financial crises. The Pujo Committee will soon investigate the concentration of banking power, documenting how a small group of men control access to capital and thus shape the entire economy. The banker understands that his world is changing, that the freedom and power he has enjoyed will not continue indefinitely, that new regulations and restrictions will constrain how he operates. He has begun thinking about legacy, about how he will be remembered, about what will remain after his life ends. Andrew Carnegie published his essay, The Gospel of Wealth, in 1889, arguing that rich men have a moral obligation to use their fortunes for public benefit, rather than passing them intact to heirs who did nothing to earn them. The essay sparked a debate that continues still about the proper use of great wealth and the responsibilities that come with it. The banker has not yet committed to major philanthropic projects, but he thinks about them, considers what institutions he might endow, what libraries or hospitals or universities might bear his name and preserve his memory beyond his death. The economics of such giving are complicated by tax considerations. In 1907, there is no federal income tax that will not arrive until 1913, but state and local taxes exist, and estate taxes are beginning to be discussed as a way to prevent the perpetual concentration of wealth in family dynasties. The value of the banker's estate is difficult to calculate precisely, because so much of it exists in the form of securities and business interests whose values fluctuate with market conditions. But a conservative estimate might place his net worth at $15 or $20 million, a fortune large enough to put him among the wealthiest 100 individuals in America. This wealth generates income through interest and dividends and fees, perhaps $500,000 or $1 million annually, far more than he could possibly spend even with a mansion to maintain and a household staff to pay. The question of what to do with such wealth, both during life and after death, weighs on him in quiet moments. He could leave it all to his children, but that might do them more harm than good, removing the necessity of effort that gives life meaning. He could give it to charity, but which charities and for what purposes, and with what assurance that his intentions will be honoured after he's gone? He could establish a foundation, a perpetual entity that would manage and distribute his wealth according to principles he establishes, but the legal structures for such foundations are still being developed, and their long-term effectiveness remains uncertain. These concerns occupy him sometimes as he lies in this bed, waiting for sleep to come, reviewing the day's decisions and anticipating tomorrow's challenges. The responsibility of managing great wealth is more complex than most people imagine, requiring not just intelligence and discipline, but philosophical clarity about purposes and values. Money is ultimately only a tool, a means to various ends, and the question of which ends to pursue haunts those who have more money than they can possibly use for personal consumption. You sit carefully on the edge of the bed, feeling the mattress yield beneath your weight, and imagine what it must be like to lie here, night after night, carrying the weight of decisions that affect thousands of employees and millions of dollars, trying to find rest despite the endless calculations and concerns that occupy the mind. The bed is comfortable, extraordinarily so, its mattress and pillows and linens all chosen and maintained with care, but comfort alone cannot guarantee peace. On the wall opposite the bed hangs a mirror in a gilt frame, and in passing, you catch your own reflection. Ghostly in the dim light, a figure both present and absent, both seeing and seen. The mirror has reflected the banker's face thousands of times as he is dressed each morning and undressed each evening, has witnessed the gradual changes that age brings, the greying hair and deepening lines, the subtle alterations that mark time's passage even in those who seem most powerful. The room is quiet now, extraordinarily so, the thick walls and heavy curtains creating an acoustic environment that seems separate from the city beyond. You can hear your own breathing, steady and slow, and the faint ticking of a clock somewhere nearby, measuring time in the same patient way it has always been measured, second by second, minute by minute, hour by hour. The day's concerns and tomorrow's obligations feel distant here, held at bay by walls and wealth, by the deliberate creation of a sanctuary where even a banker can lay down his burdens and close his eyes. The bed waits, inviting and patient, its linens smooth and cool, its pillows plump with down, its whole presence a promise of rest. This is where the journey has been leading, toward this moment of surrender, this acknowledgement that even those who command millions must eventually yield to sleep's gentle insistence. The night deepens around you, and the mansion holds you safely, its marble walls and wooden floors, its accumulated luxury and carefully preserved beauty, all serving ultimately this simple purpose, to provide shelter, to create peace, to make possible the rest that every human being requires. You lean back slowly, feeling the pillows accept the weight of your head, and the bed receives you completely. The coverlet pulls up easily, its silk smooth against your hands, and the weight of the blanket settles over you like a benediction. This is what wealth can purchase, not immortality or perfect happiness, but comfort extraordinary enough to ease the transition from waking to sleep, from consciousness to dreams, from the weight of the world to the lightness of surrender. As you lie in the master bedroom, your eyes growing heavy, your consciousness beginning to soften at its edges, you become aware of sounds above you, faint but present. The building itself seems to breathe, and somewhere in the upper reaches of the house there is movement. Quiet footsteps on floors you have not yet visited, the continuation of work that never fully stops even at this late hour. Your curiosity, gentle and drowsy, draws you upward one last time before sleep, finally claims you completely. You rise from the bed, moving now with the peculiar weightlessness of approaching dreams, and find yourself climbing another staircase, narrower than the others, its steps covered not in thick carpet, but in simple painted wood. This is a servant's staircase, one of several that thread through the mansion, allowing staff to move between floors without being seen by family or guests, maintaining the fiction that service happens invisibly, that meals appear and rooms are cleaned by some mysterious agency that requires no acknowledgement. The fourth floor opens before you, and immediately you sense the difference. The ceilings here are lower, perhaps 8 feet rather than the 12 or 15 feet of the floors below. The walls are plastered and painted white, without the silk coverings or wood panelling of the family's spaces. The floors are bare wood, scrubbed clean but unpolished, practical rather than beautiful. The corridor is lit by a single electric bulb, its light harsh compared to the warm glow of the sconces and chandeliers downstairs. Doors line both sides of the corridor, and they stand open in several cases, revealing small rooms that serve as bedrooms for the household staff. Each room is perhaps 10 feet by 12 feet, containing a narrow bed, a small wardrobe, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and little else. These are not spaces designed for living but for sleeping, for the minimal rest required between long shifts of labour. The servants spend most of their waking hours in the kitchen, the scullery, the laundry rooms, or in the family spaces where they work, coming to these rooms only to sleep and perhaps to have a few moments of privacy. You pause at the threshold of one room and look inside. The bed is made with military precision, its thin mattress covered with sheets and a wool blanket, a single pillow at its head. On the washstand, a mirror reflects your ghostly presence, and beside it sits a small collection of personal items, a brush, a few hairpins, a photograph in a simple frame showing people who might be family, left behind in another country or another city. The austerity of the space is striking after the luxury of the floors below, a reminder that this mansion contains multiple economies, multiple standards of living existing in close proximity, but separated by unbridgeable social distance. The servants who occupy these rooms are the machinery that makes the mansion function. Without them, the luxury below would be impossible to maintain, the dinners could not be prepared, the rooms would not be cleaned, the family's needs could not be anticipated and met. A household of this scale requires perhaps 20 servants working in carefully defined roles, each person occupying a specific position in a hierarchy that is as rigid and formal as any corporate structure. At the top of this hierarchy stands the butler, a man of perhaps 50 years old who has spent his entire adult life in service and has risen through the ranks to achieve this position of authority. The butler manages the male servants, oversees the wine cellar and the silver, and serves as the public face of the household, greeting guests and managing the formal rituals of entertaining. His salary might be $60 or $70 per month, substantial by the standards of domestic service, though modest compared to what a clerk in a bank might earn. The butler has his own room, slightly larger than the others, and he's allowed certain privileges like taking meals in his own space rather than with the other servants. Below the butler in the male hierarchy are the footmen, typically young men in their 20s, chosen partly for their height and appearance because they will be visible to guests. Footmen serve at table, answer the door, carry messages, and perform the countless small tasks that maintain the household's smooth operation. They earn perhaps $25 or $30 per month, less than half the butler's salary, and they share rooms with other footmen, sleeping two to a room in most cases. The work is physically demanding, requiring them to be on their feet for 12 or 14 hours at a stretch, carrying heavy trays and climbing stairs dozens of times each day. On the female side of the household, the housekeeper holds a position equivalent to the butler's, managing the female staff and overseeing the cleaning and maintenance of all the rooms. She might earn $50 or $60 per month, slightly less than the butler but still a substantial wage by the standards of domestic service. The housekeeper is typically an older woman, unmarried or widowed, who has devoted her life to service and earned her position through years of demonstrated competence and reliability. Below the housekeeper are the ladies' maids and housemaids, young women who clean the rooms, make the beds, dust the furniture, and attend to the countless details that keep a house of this scale presentable. The lady's maid, who serves the mistress of the house personally, helping her dress and maintaining her wardrobe, earns perhaps $30 per month. The housemaids, who do the heavier cleaning work, earn $20 or less, making them among the lowest paid members of the household. In the basement, invisible to guests and rarely seen even by the family, the cook presides over her domain. She might earn $40 or $50 per month, her value recognized through compensation, if not through social status. Below her are kitchen maids and scullery maids, young women who assist with food preparation and who wash the endless dishes and pots that formal entertaining generates. These lowest members of the household hierarchy earn perhaps $15 per month, barely enough to save anything after purchasing the few personal items they require. The total annual cost of maintaining this staff, as you calculated earlier, reaches perhaps $15,000 or $20,000 when you account for wages, room, board, and the occasional uniform or necessary equipment. This represents a significant expense, certainly, but one that is considered essential to maintaining the household's operation and the family's social position. The question of whether such expenditure is justified, whether the labour of 20 people can rightly be claimed by a single family, is not one that most members of this social class spend much time contemplating. The system exists, has existed for generations, and will continue to exist until larger economic and social forces render it obsolete. The servants themselves come from various backgrounds, though most share the common experience of economic necessity. Some are immigrants, arrived from Ireland or Italy or Eastern Europe within the past few years, grateful for steady employment even at low wages and in conditions that offer little autonomy. They might have left behind families, sent money home to support parents or siblings, hoping eventually to save enough to establish themselves in some small business or to bring family members to America. Others are native-born Americans from rural areas or small towns, daughters and sons of farmers or labourers who came to the city seeking better opportunities than their birthplaces offered. Domestic service, despite its low status, provides room and board along with wages, eliminating the need to pay rent or purchase food, allowing servants to save more of their earnings than they could if they worked in factories or shops and had to support themselves independently. The working conditions in domestic service are shaped by the live-in nature of the employment. Servants are on call essentially at all times, expected to respond immediately if the family requires something regardless of the hour. A bell system connects every room in the house to the servants' quarters and the kitchen, allowing family members to summon assistance without leaving their rooms. The bells ring at all hours, day and night, and servants must drop whatever they are doing to respond promptly. The hours are long, typically beginning at 6 in the morning and extending until 10 or 11 at night, with only brief breaks for meals. Sunday might offer a few hours of freedom, an afternoon when servants can attend church or visit friends, but even this depends on the household's needs. If guests are visiting or a dinner party is planned, the servant's schedule takes priority over personal time. Privacy is minimal, with servants sharing rooms and having little space for personal possessions. Their lives are subject to constant supervision by senior staff, and infractions of rules regarding behaviour, dress, or the performance of duties can result in dismissal without notice or references, making it difficult to find new positions. The vulnerability of servants to arbitrary termination creates an atmosphere of anxiety that shapes behaviour and limits the ability to advocate for better conditions, and yet for many servants these positions represent the best options available in an economy that offers limited alternatives for those without capital or specialised skills. Factory work might pay similar wages but without providing room and board, and the conditions could be equally harsh or worse. Retail work in shops paid even less and offered no security. Agricultural labour, the traditional occupation of the rural poor, was being mechanised and consolidated, reducing opportunities and wages. Domestic service, for all its drawbacks, offered at least the stability of employment in households that were unlikely to fail suddenly or to reduce staff arbitrarily. The economics of domestic labour were shaped fundamentally by the vast supply of workers relative to demand. The great wave of immigration that brought millions to America between 1880 and 1914 created a buyer's market for labour, keeping wages low and conditions favourable to employers. If a servant proved unsatisfactory or demanded higher wages, dozens of others stood ready to take the position. This imbalance of power between employers and employees characterised not just domestic service, but most labour markets in this era, before unions gained strength, and before governments began regulating working conditions and establishing minimum standards. The eventual decline of household service as a major source of employment would be driven by several factors. The First World War would disrupt immigration, cutting off the supply of new servants, while simultaneously creating alternative employment opportunities in war industries that paid better wages. The spread of labour-saving devices, from vacuum cleaners to washing machines, would reduce the amount of human labour required to maintain a household. Rising wages in other sectors would make domestic service increasingly unattractive relative to alternatives, and changing social attitudes would make the master-servant relationship seem increasingly antiquated, incompatible with democratic ideals and modern notions of human dignity. But in 1907, standing in the servants' quarters at midnight, none of this future is visible. The rooms stretch along the corridor, each one occupied by someone whose labour makes possible the luxury below, whose invisibility is the condition of the family's comfort. These servants will rise in a few hours to begin another day of work, preparing breakfast, cleaning rooms, maintaining the endless cycles of labour that keep the household functioning. You turn away from the servants' quarters and find yourself descending again, moving back through the levels of the house toward the master bedroom where your journey began. The contrast between the sparse rooms above and the luxurious spaces below is sharp, but both are part of the same economic structure, the same system that concentrates wealth and distributes it unequally, that creates comfort for some through the labour of others. The stairs carry you downward, and the quality of the finishes improves with each floor. The painted walls become panelled, the bare floors become carpeted, the harsh electric bulbs become soft sconces with silk shades. You pass through the third floor where the family sleeps, through the second floor with its entertaining spaces, and finally return to the master bedroom where your body still lies, waiting for your consciousness to rejoin it. The bed receives you again, and this time you settle more deeply, your curiosity satisfied, your journey through the mansion approaching its conclusion. You have seen the public grandeur and the private comfort, the accumulated art and the spaces where work happens, the luxury of the family and the austerity of the servants. You have walked through an economic system made architectural, a social structure rendered in marble and wood, a moment in history when wealth reached a particular apex of confidence and display. The weight of these observations presses gently on your mind, but it is a weight that encourages rest rather than preventing it. The house is what it is, a product of its time and place, a monument to both human achievement and human inequality. To judge it harshly would be to deny its beauty, to celebrate it uncritically would be to ignore its costs. Better simply to observe, to understand, to let it be what it is while acknowledging what it meant to those who lived within its walls, both above stairs and below. The pillow beneath your head seems softer now, more welcoming, and the blankets have settled into perfect weight and warmth. Your breathing slows, matching the rhythm of the house itself, that gentle rise and fall of an old building settling into night. The servants sleep in their narrow beds above, the family rests in their comfortable rooms, and you, occupying some liminal space between visitor and ghost, between waking and dreaming, allow yourself to sink deeper into the stillness that midnight brings. The house breathes around you as you lie in the master bedroom, your consciousness hovering in that strange territory between waking and sleep. You feel yourself sinking deeper into the mattress, the boundaries of your body becoming less distinct, and in this softened state you become aware of something you had not noticed before, a presence beneath you, below the marble floors and wooden joists, something that anchors the entire structure in a way that has nothing to do with foundations or architecture. Your awareness, dreamlike now, floats free from the bed and drifts downward, passing through floor and ceiling as if they were made of mist rather than solid matter. You descend through the third floor where the family sleeps, through the second floor with its picture gallery and dining room, through the grand entrance hall with its marble floor and soaring ceiling, and finally below ground level into spaces that guests never see and even family members rarely visit. The basement of the mansion is a different world entirely, utilitarian and stark. Its space is devoted to the mechanical systems that make modern life possible. Here are the boilers that heat water and generate steam for the radiators, massive iron cylinders tended by a night engineer who sleeps nearby in case adjustments are needed. Here are the coal bins that hold tons of fuel delivered by wagon through sidewalk grates, the laundry rooms with their copper tubs and wringer mechanisms, the storage areas holding supplies and equipment for every conceivable household need. But you're drawn past all of these functional spaces to a particular door, heavier than the others, made of steel rather than wood, fitted with locks of unusual complexity. This door guards the strong room, the vault where the banker keeps wealth in its most concentrated and tangible form. During your earlier visit to the library, you saw the safe built into the wall, but that safe holds only documents and a small amount of cash for immediate needs. The real repository of liquid wealth lies here, behind steel and combination locks, in a room specifically designed to resist fire and theft. The door swings open at your approach, responding to your dreamlike state rather than to any physical key, and you pass into a space that is surprisingly small given its importance. The strong room is perhaps 10 feet square, its walls reinforced concrete several feet thick, its ceiling low enough that a tall man would need to duck slightly. The air here is cool and dry, maintained at specific temperature and humidity levels to protect the paper and prevent the tarnishing of metal. A single electric bulb burns continuously, its light harsh and revealing, turning everything it touches into sharp shadows and bright surfaces. The room contains several elements, each one representing a different form in which wealth can be stored. Against one wall stand canvas bags, tied at the top and stacked on heavy shelves. These bags contain gold coins, $20 double eagles minted by the United States government, each one containing nearly an ounce of pure gold. The weight of these bags is substantial, perhaps 50 pounds each, the physical embodiment of the old saying that money has weight, that wealth is something you can feel pressing down on your hands and arms. You approach one of the bags and loosen its tie, looking inside at the golden disc stacked within. The coins gleam even in the dim electric light, their surfaces stamped with the profile of liberty and the eagle that gives them their name. Each coin is worth $20 by law, meaning that each bag containing 250 coins represents $5,000. The shelves hold perhaps 20 bags, $100,000 in gold, a fortune sufficient to purchase a dozen substantial houses or to fund the operations of a small business for years. The psychology of gold is ancient and complex, rooted in the metal's physical properties and in thousands of years of human civilization using it as a store of value. Gold does not rust or tarnish significantly, does not decay or lose its essential qualities over time. It is rare enough to be precious but common enough to be found in most regions of the world. It is soft enough to be worked easily but durable enough to withstand handling. And it is beautiful, catching and holding light in ways that make it inherently attractive to human eyes. The gold standard, which governs monetary policy in 1907, rests on the principle that currency should be backed by gold held in reserve, that paper money is ultimately a claim on metal rather than valuable in itself. The United States has been on a gold standard since 1879, when the government resumed redeeming paper currency for gold after the disruptions of the Civil War. Under this system, anyone holding paper money can theoretically exchange it for gold at a fixed rate, $20.67 per ounce, providing a constraint on the money supply and a check against inflation. The economic debates surrounding the gold standard are intense in this era. Advocates argue that it provides stability, that it prevents governments from debasing the currency through excessive printing of money, that it facilitates international trade by providing a common measure of value. Critics argue that it restricts the money supply artificially, that it favours creditors over debtors by maintaining the value of money even as prices fall, that it transfers too much power to those who control gold supplies. The banker whose vault you are exploring maintains gold partly as a hedge against financial instability, a form of insurance that will retain value even if paper currency becomes suspect or banks fail. During the Panic of 1907, When depositors rushed to withdraw funds and banks struggled to meet demands for cash, those who held gold possessed the ultimate form of liquidity. Gold could always be used to settle debts, could always be converted to other forms of wealth, commanded respect and acceptance in ways that paper promises sometimes did not. But gold also has significant disadvantages as a form of wealth. It is heavy and difficult to transport, requiring special security during any movement. It does not generate income, unlike stocks or bonds that pay dividends or interest. It cannot easily be divided, making it impractical for small transactions, and its value fluctuates with supply and demand, though more slowly and within narrower ranges than most other commodities. These limitations explain why most wealth is held in other forms, with gold serving as a reserve rather than a primary investment. Next to the shelves of gold locked inside a steel cabinet, you find bearer bonds, securities that pay interest to whoever physically possesses them, rather than to named owners. These bonds represent loans to corporations or governments, promises, to repay principal plus interest at specified times. A bond might have a face value of $1,000 and pay 5% interest annually, $50 per year, with the principal repayable in 10 or 20 years. The holder simply clips coupons attached to the bond and presents them for payment at a bank or the issuer's office. The economics of bearer bonds reflect a time when anonymity in financial matters was considered a right, rather than a reason for suspicion. The bearer bond allowed wealthy individuals to hold assets without public record, to transfer wealth without documentation, to receive income without it being traced to them specifically. This privacy had legitimate uses, protecting families from publicity and allowing for discreet financial planning. But it also facilitated tax evasion and made bearer bonds attractive to criminals who needed to move money without leaving trails. The bonds in this cabinet represent perhaps $500,000 of face value, and they are stored with extraordinary care. Each bond is a negotiable instrument, as good as cash to anyone who holds it. If stolen, they could be cashed by the thief with little chance of being traced or recovered. This makes their security a matter of critical importance, and the steel cabinet with its combination lock provides protection against casual theft, though not against a determined and skilled safecracker. The yields on bonds in this era vary depending on the creditworthiness of the issuer and the term to maturity. United States government bonds are considered the safest and typically pay 4 or 5% annually. Corporate bonds from established companies might pay 6 or 7%. Bonds from newer or riskier enterprises might promise 10% or more, though with correspondingly greater chance of default. The banker's bond portfolio is likely weighted towards safer issues, preserving capital rather than seeking maximum returns. In another section of the vault you find stock certificates, beautifully engraved documents that represent ownership in corporations. Each certificate is a small work of art, printed on high-quality paper and decorated with vignettes showing factories or railways or other symbols of industrial activity. The certificates are signed by corporate officers and stamped with official seals, markers of authenticity that would be difficult to forge. Unlike bearer bonds, stock certificates are registered to specific owners, and transfer requires endorsement and re-registration with the corporation. The certificates here represent ownership stakes in various enterprises, from railways to steel manufacturers to banks and insurance companies. A certificate for 100 shares of Pennsylvania Railroad, one of the largest and most profitable railway companies in America. A certificate for 50 shares of United States Steel, the massive corporation formed by merging several smaller steel producers under the direction of banker leadership. A certificate for shares in a bank, perhaps one that the banker helped establish, or in which he serves as a director. The value of these certificates fluctuates with market conditions, rising when the corporations prosper and falling when they struggle. A share of Pennsylvania Railroad stock in 1907 might trade for around $130, meaning that the certificate for 100 shares represents $13,000 of wealth. But this value is not guaranteed, not backed by gold or secured by liens on property. It exists purely as a claim on the corporation's future earnings, a bet that the railway will continue to generate profits and distribute them to shareholders as dividends. The stock market in this era is far less regulated than it will become, far more susceptible to manipulation and insider trading. Men with privileged information can purchase shares before good news becomes public, selling at a profit once others learn what they already knew. Pools of investors can coordinate their buying and selling to create artificial price movements, profiting from the resulting confusion. The banker whose vault you're exploring almost certainly participates in these practices, though whether they are considered ethical depends largely on whom you ask. The evolution of money from physical objects to abstract ledger entries is ongoing in 1907 but far from complete. Most large transactions still involve physical delivery of gold or securities, with messengers carrying locked cases between banks and brokerage houses, with receipts signed and countersigned to document every transfer. The telephone allows for quicker communication, but the actual movement of value still requires the movement of objects, of coins or certificates or bonds that embody wealth in tangible form. The creation of the Federal Reserve System in 1913 will begin to change this, establishing a central bank that can move money through wire transfers and book entries rather than physical transport. The elimination of the gold standard for domestic transactions in 1933 will further abstract money, making it purely a matter of accounting rather than a claim on metal. And eventually, in the late 20th century, money will become almost entirely electronic, numbers in computer systems that can be moved around the world instantly, without any physical component at all. But standing in this vault in 1907, you're witnessing money in a more primitive form, closer to its origins in precious metals and handwritten promises. The gold is heavy in your hands, if you were to lift one of those bags. The bonds and certificates are tangible, things that can be touched and examined and locked away. The wealth they represent is real in a way that will become increasingly metaphorical as money evolves toward pure abstraction. The security measures protecting this vault reflect both the technology available and the threats considered most likely. The steel door and combination locks guard against forced entry, though a determined thief with sufficient time and tools could eventually breach them. The location of the vault in the basement makes it less accessible from outside the building, requiring a break-in through the house itself rather than direct access from the street. The presence of servants throughout the house at all hours provides a form of human surveillance, making it difficult for intruders to operate unnoticed. Bank robberies do occur in this era, though they are less common than popular fiction might suggest. The risks are high and the rewards uncertain, particularly for attacks on private vaults rather than bank buildings. The amount of gold and securities that a thief could physically carry is limited by weight and bulk. And the disposal of stolen goods presents challenges, particularly for bearer bonds and stock certificates that might be traced if attempts are made to cash or sell them. The greater risk to wealth in this form is not theft, but financial collapse. The possibility that the institution's backing paper promises might fail, that the gold standard might be abandoned, that political upheaval might make wealth suddenly worthless. History provides examples of such catastrophes, from the hyperinflation that destroyed the continental dollar during the Revolutionary War to the frequent panics and depressions that have punctuated the 19th century. The wealthy protect themselves partly through diversification, holding wealth in multiple forms and in multiple locations, never trusting any single institution or asset class completely. As you float in this vault, surrounded by the physical manifestations of wealth, you feel the peculiar heaviness of money, the way it anchors and constrains even as it liberates. The gold in those bags is freedom and burden simultaneously, power and responsibility, security and anxiety. The bonds and certificates represent claims on future earnings, bets on economic growth, faith in institutions and systems that are ultimately human creations, fragile and contingent. The vault holds perhaps $1 million in total, combining the gold and securities at current market values. This represents only a portion of the banker's total wealth, with additional millions held in bank accounts, real estate, business interests and other forms. But this portion is the most liquid, the most immediately accessible, the emergency reserve that could be deployed quickly if circumstances required. It is wealth sleeping, waiting, held in suspension until needed. You turn slowly in the small space, taking in the shelves and cabinets one final time, and notice that despite the fortune concentrated here, the room feels almost sad, certainly lonely. Wealth in pure form, separated from human use or enjoyment, becomes merely potential, unrealized and sterile. The gold could purchase so much, the bonds could fund so many ventures, the stock certificates represent ownership in enterprises that employ thousands and serve millions. But locked in this vault, They serve only to reassure their owner that he possesses resources sufficient for any emergency, any need, any desire that might arise. The electric bulb burns on, indifferent and eternal, casting its harsh light on metal and paper. The air is still, undisturbed by breath or movement. Time seems suspended here, held at bay by concrete and steel, by the deliberate creation of a space outside the normal flow of commerce and life. This is where money sleeps, in darkness and silence, waiting to be awakened by need or opportunity, by crisis or ambition, by the countless reasons that humans give for moving wealth from storage into action. You feel yourself beginning to rise, to float upward again toward the bedroom where your body waits. The vault has shown you what you came to see, revealed the secret at the mansion's foundation, the accumulated claims on future value that make possible all the marble and mahogany, all the paintings and servants, all the comfort and security that wealth provides. The door closes behind you as you ascend, its locks engaging automatically, sealing the strong room until the next time it needs to be opened. Through floor and ceiling you rise, passing the functional basement spaces, the grand entrance hall, the picture gallery and dining room, the private apartments where the family sleeps. You return to the master bedroom and to your body lying peaceful in its fine linens, and consciousness reunites with flesh so smoothly that you hardly notice the transition. You are back, fully back, and the bed holds you with renewed gentleness, grateful for your return. The knowledge of what lies beneath the house settles into your awareness like sediment drifting to the bottom of a still pool. The gold and bonds and certificates exist, create a foundation different from, but just as real as the concrete and steel that support the building's physical weight. And now, knowing this, you can truly rest, your curiosity satisfied, your journey through the mansion complete, except for the final descent into dreams. The bed holds you now with such complete acceptance that you feel yourself dissolving into it, your body becoming indistinguishable from the mattress and pillows, your breathing synchronized with the house's own slow respiration. The boundaries between sleeping and waking have grown so thin as to be meaningless, and in this liminal state, time itself begins to behave strangely, folding back on itself, stretching forward, allowing you to see the mansion not as it is in this single frozen moment, but as it exists across decades, across the long arc of its existence from construction to whatever fate awaits it in the unknowable future. You see the lot as it was before the mansion, an empty space between other buildings, its potential visible only to those who could imagine transformation, who could picture marble where mud lay, who could envision rooms and corridors where there was only air and possibility. The year is perhaps 1901 or 1902, and the banker has just purchased this land, paying perhaps $300,000 for the privilege of building here, on this particular stretch of Fifth Avenue where wealth concentrates itself, where proximity to other great fortunes creates its own form of validation. The architect comes with his drawings, rolls of paper covered in elevations and floor plans, in details that show mouldings and cornices, in specifications that describe materials and methods. The banker studies these drawings in his temporary offices, imagining the rooms as they will be, trying to project himself forward into the space the architect has created on paper. Modifications are suggested, changes made, the plans revised again and again, until they satisfy both the architect's sense of proportion and the banker's sense of what is required to make a proper statement. Then construction begins, and you watch it unfold in dream time, months compressed into minutes, years flowing past like water. The excavation happens first, steam shovels removing earth and dumping it into wagons that carry it away to fill low-lying areas elsewhere in the expanding city. The hole grows deeper until it reaches bedrock or stable soil, and then the foundation is poured, concrete reinforced with steel rods, creating a base that will support the extraordinary weight of marble and stone that will rise above it. The walls go up slowly, limestone blocks hoisted into place by derricks and secured with mortar, each course laid level and true, the facade emerging like a sculpture being freed from shapeless stone. You can see the workers, dozens of them, men in caps and work clothes, some skilled stonemasons and others simple labourers, all of them contributing their muscle and sweat to this monument to another man's wealth. They arrive at dawn and work until dusk, taking breaks for meals but otherwise engaged in constant labour, their wages a few dollars per day, their contribution to the mansion's creation recorded nowhere except in the structure itself. The roof goes on, slate tiles from Vermont arranged in overlapping courses that will shed rain and snow for a century without failing. The windows are installed, glass set into frames, the transparent barriers between interior and exterior that allow light while excluding weather. The interior work begins, carpenters framing walls and floors, plasterers creating smooth surfaces from rough studs and joists, electricians threading copper wire through spaces that will soon be sealed forever behind finished walls. You see the Italian craftsmen arriving to install the marble floors, recognizing their expertise from your earlier observations, watching as they work on their knees day after day, setting each piece with care that borders on reverence. You see the woodworkers building the grand staircase, its curved balustrade requiring techniques that cannot be rushed or simplified, that demand patience and skill accumulated over years of practice. You see the painters mixing their pigments and applying them to plaster, creating the soft tones that will wrap the rooms in light. The construction takes 4 years, perhaps slightly less, and costs escalate beyond initial estimates, as they always do when clients have resources to cover overruns and tastes that tend toward elaboration. The final cost approaches $2 million or perhaps exceeds it, and the banker pays these bills without complaint because the mansion is his statement, his proof that he has arrived at a level of success that commands respect, that he possesses not just wealth, but taste, not just money, but refinement. Then the house is finished, and the family moves in, and you watch as it fills with life, as the servants take up their positions, as the rooms begin to serve their intended purposes. The dining room hosts its first dinner party, 24 guests gathered around the gleaming table, conversation flowing like wine, connections forming that will shape business dealings for years to come. The picture gallery receives visitors who admire the paintings and ask about their provenance, establishing the banker as a man of culture as well as commerce. The library sees evening after evening of quiet work, ledgers reviewed and correspondence answered, the daily management of millions occupying hours that others might spend in leisure. The children grow up in these rooms, their childhoods shaped by privilege that seems natural to them, that they accept as simply the way things are rather than as extraordinary good fortune. They play in spaces that servants clean, they eat food that cooks prepare, they wear clothes that maids maintain, and all of this happens so smoothly that they barely notice the labour that makes their comfort possible. They are being trained for lives of wealth and power, though whether this training serves them well or damages them in subtle ways is difficult to determine from the outside. Time flows forward in your dream, years passing like seasons, and you see the mansion at its peak, sometime around 1910 or 1912, when the Gilded Age has reached its fullest expression, when wealth is celebrated rather than questioned, when the concentration of fortune in few hands seems natural and perhaps even beneficial to society as a whole. The house gleams with care and attention, its every surface maintained, its systems functioning perfectly, its purpose fulfilled. But the dream shows you what comes next, the changes that no amount of wealth can prevent or control. The First World War arrives, distant but disruptive, making the extravagance of the mansion seem suddenly inappropriate, even vaguely shameful. The income tax is introduced in 1913, initially at low rates, but establishing a principle that wealth should be shared more broadly, that private fortune creates public obligations. The banker pays these new taxes without enthusiasm, but with understanding that the world is changing, that the freedom he enjoyed is being constrained by new expectations and regulations. The Pujo Committee investigates the concentration of banking power, documenting how a small group of men controls access to capital, how interlocking directorates allow these men to influence vast portions of the economy. The banker is called to testify, finds himself defending practices that had seemed normal and necessary, discovers that public opinion is turning against the very success he has spent his life pursuing. He returns to his mansion after these hearings feeling older, more uncertain, questioning whether the world he helped build can survive the forces now gathering against it. The estate tax is introduced in 1916, initially affecting only the very wealthy but setting another precedent, establishing that accumulated wealth should be partially redistributed at death rather than passing intact to heirs. The banker begins to think more seriously about his legacy, about what will happen to his fortune after he dies, about whether his children will be able to maintain the mansion, or whether changed economic circumstances will force its sale or conversion. The years pass in your dream with increasing speed, the 1920s arriving with their brief resurgence of optimism, their stock market boom that makes paper fortunes and encourages speculation on unprecedented scales. The mansion hosts parties again, though perhaps with less certainty than before, less confidence that this way of life represents a permanent achievement rather than a temporary privilege. The banker is older now, his hair white, his movements slower, and he knows that the world belongs increasingly to younger men with different methods and different values. Then comes October of 1929, and you see the stock market collapse, see fortunes disappear in days or even hours, see the panic that grips financial markets as prices fall, and margin calls forth desperate selling. The banker survives this crash, his conservatism and diversification protecting him from the worst losses, but he sees friends and competitors ruined, sees institutions he thought permanent revealed as fragile, sees the entire structure of American capitalism shaken to its foundations. The Great Depression follows, years of economic contraction and unemployment, of banks failing and businesses closing, of breadlines and Hoovervilles, of a nation questioning whether the capitalist system itself has failed. The mansion stands through these years, still maintained though perhaps less lavishly, still occupied though its scale seems increasingly absurd when so many have so little. The banker makes donations to relief efforts, tries to do his part to alleviate suffering, but nothing he gives can match the scale of need or answer the fundamental questions being asked about inequality and economic justice. You see him dying, perhaps in the early 1930s, lying in the master bedroom where you now rest, his wife beside him, his children grown and living their own lives. He has lived long enough to see his world transformed, to witness the end of the era that made his fortune possible, to understand that what he built will not continue in the form he imagined. His last thoughts, if you could know them, might be about legacy, about what remains after individual lives end, about whether the marble and mahogany will outlast the memory of the man who paid for them. The estate is settled, taxes paid at rates that would have seemed confiscatory to an earlier generation, and the fortune is divided among heirs who inherit wealth but not the circumstances that created it. The mansion passes to the oldest son, but he finds it impossible to maintain at the pre-depression standard, impossible to justify the cost when his own fortune has diminished and his sensibilities have been shaped by different times. The staff is reduced, some rooms closed off, the entertaining scaled back dramatically. The Second World War comes, and the mansion is briefly considered for conversion to military or government use. But ultimately it remains private, occupied, but increasingly anachronistic. The son dies, perhaps in the 1950s, and his heirs face a decision: maintain the mansion at crushing cost or find some other solution that preserves the building while ending its use as a single-family dwelling. The dream shows you the transformation, the difficult negotiations that lead to the mansion becoming something else, something more accessible and more suited to changed times. Perhaps it becomes a museum, its picture gallery open to the public, its rooms preserved as examples of Gilded Age architecture and design. The Frick collection provides a model showing how private splendour can be transformed into public cultural resource, how wealth that was once exclusive can become shared heritage, or perhaps the mansion is sold to an institution, becoming offices or a foundation headquarters, its grand spaces adapted to new purposes while retaining their essential character. The dining room might host board meetings instead of dinner parties, the library might serve executives rather than the original banker, but the architecture endures, finding new functions while preserving its beauty. Or in the least happy outcome, the mansion is demolished, its limestone facade torn down to make way for an apartment building or office tower, its marble floors broken up and discarded, its mahogany panelling salvaged by dealers who sell it piecemeal to collectors. This fate befalls many of the Fifth Avenue mansions, their lots too valuable to justify their continued existence as private homes, their maintenance costs exceeding what any individual or family can rationally bear. The dream does not show you which fate awaits this particular mansion, leaves the question unresolved, but you understand that all of these outcomes share something essential: the end of the mansion's original purpose, the termination of its existence as a banker's private palace, the transformation of concentrated private wealth into something more distributed and accessible. You see the long view, the century and more that stretches from the mansion's construction to the present day, and from this perspective the drama of individual lives diminishes. The fortunes made and lost become less significant. The social structures that seemed permanent reveal themselves as temporary arrangements that serve particular times and then dissolve when circumstances change. The marble endures longer than the men who paid for it. The craftsmanship outlasts the craftsman. The beauty persists after the purposes that justified its creation have been forgotten or abandoned. There is melancholy in this vision, but not tragedy. Acceptance rather than regret. The mansion was built, served its purposes, and either continues in transformed state or passes entirely, making room for whatever comes next. The banker lived, made his fortune, enjoyed his success, and died, as all people do regardless of wealth. The servants worked, supported their families, and moved on to other positions or other lives, their contribution to the mansion's existence real even if unrecorded. The wealth that seemed so solid, so permanent, proves to be fluid after all, moving from one form to another, from gold to paper to electronic entries, from private hands to public institutions, from concentration to distribution, and back again in cycles that repeat across generations. Nothing is finally owned, only temporarily possessed, held in trust for the brief span of a human life and then passed on, voluntarily or involuntarily, to whatever comes next. You float through these visions, seeing the mansion in all its temporal dimensions, understanding it as a point in a longer story about wealth and power, about inequality and change, about human striving and the limits that time and circumstance place on individual achievement. The beauty remains real, the craftsmanship remains admirable, but they exist now as evidence of what was rather than as celebration of what is. The dream begins to fade, its images growing softer and less distinct, and you feel yourself being drawn back into your body, back into the present moment, back into the master bedroom where you lie in comfort, purchased by wealth that will someday disperse, in a mansion whose fate cannot be controlled by those who built it. The pillow beneath your head is just a pillow, the blankets just blankets, and the room just a room, their significance reduced from symbol to simple object, from statement to shelter. Time resumes its normal flow, or perhaps you simply stop being able to perceive its larger patterns and you are left with only now, only this moment, only the gentle weight of sleep pressing down on your eyelids and the soft darkness gathering at the edges of your vision. The mansion has shown you what it needed to show you, has revealed its secrets and its sorrows, its glories and its eventual dissolution into whatever forms the future requires. And you, having seen all this, having walked through marble halls and glimpsed the vault beneath, having understood both the achievement and the cost, can finally let it all go, can release your grip on consciousness and analysis, can surrender to the sleep that has been waiting patiently through this long night's journey. The house will stand or fall according to forces beyond your control, the wealth will flow according to laws you did not write, and none of it requires your attention anymore. Sleep comes like a tide returning, inexorable and gentle, washing over you in waves that grow stronger with each repetition. The mansion dissolves into darkness, the rooms and corridors fading until only the sensation of the bed remains, and then even that becomes abstract. Less a place than a feeling, less a feeling than simply peace. You have walked through marble halls built by ambition and maintained by labour, through rooms where fortunes were managed and lives were lived, through the visible and invisible economies that made such splendour possible. You have seen wealth in all its forms, from gold sleeping in darkness to paintings glowing in lamplight, from the master's silk coverlet to the servant's narrow bed. And now you understand something that the mansion has been teaching you all along, that beauty and inequality can exist side by side, that nothing built by human hands lasts forever, that even marble crumbles eventually and fortunes dissolve like morning mist. But tonight, none of that matters. Tonight you are simply here, held safely in this bed, wrapped in comfort that exists outside of time and judgment. The house has shared its secrets, and now releases you from the need to carry them. The banker sleeps, the servants sleep, and you sleep too, equal in this one essential way, all of you surrendering to the same gentle darkness. Let the mansion fade now. Let the marble and mahogany dissolve into shadow. Let every calculation, every concern, every memory of wealth and want drift away like smoke. You are safe here. You are welcome here. Rest now. Simply rest.